Rap is filled with references to crime, and over the years, there have been some heinous criminals that have made it big in hip-hop. From kidnapping innocent women,
man arrested accused of holding a pregnant woman against her will for years,
to racking up a long list of SA cases.
Good evening. First at 6 o'clock, Mystical, a well-known rapper on the wrong side of the law tonight, his third arrest over the past 2 decades.
To even losing a $100 million empire.
Suge Knight, a former rap powerhouse, collapsing in court where he's facing a murder charge. The man who built an empire founding Death Row Records, now facing life in prison.
Hi, I'm Rashad Bashir, and this is rap's most dangerous criminals. The first rapper on this list is Tay-K, who in hindsight was doomed from the start. By the time he was born, Tay-K was already knee-deep into the gang life because both his parents were gang members, meaning he grew up with that being his life. Once Tay-K reached high school, he formed a group with his friends called Daytona Boys in 2014, but they never really took off, because before Tay-K could even get traction in the industry, he already did something to damage his career, and this began on December 31st, 2015. Around this time, Tay-K was starting to get some buzz, so that meant that the Daytona Boys were getting to perform a few shows. Around this time, they attended a New Year's show in Arlington. However, as they were leaving at around 2 a.m., one of the boys tried to flirt with another girl in another car, and this would end badly for everyone involved. During that tragic incident, Santana Sage, one member of the Daytona Boys, pulled up next to the car as he and Tay-K tried to holler at a girl. A guy who was in the same car told the Daytona Boys to leave, which of course did not sit well with them. This argument went on until it reached a breaking point when Santana Sage pulled out a gun and fired away, and one of the shots landed. Unfortunately for the victim, she didn't survive as the car crashed into an electric pole.
Denton police say they have identified the passengers riding with a drive-by murder suspect accused of killing a 20-year-old UNT student. We're now getting the first look at the SUV involved in the murder and a closer look at the victim, Sarah Munchlechner's vehicle.
Santana Sage was caught a few days later. As for Tay-K, luckily for him, he wasn't charged with the case even though he was involved in escalating the incident. So with such a tragic and almost lethal incident, Tay-K could have counted his losses, learned the value of life, and just focused on music. But he's here on this list for a reason, because 7 months after that New York show incident, Tay-K was involved in another crime, and this time, things would go badly for Tay-K. You see, on July 26, 2016, Tay-K and 6 other suspects tried to rob Ethan Walker, an alleged drug dealer in his home in Texas. But what makes this crazier is that the entire ordeal was actually an inside job. Apparently, 2 females who were in on it were tasked with distracting Ian. However, a fight soon broke out inside the home, which led to Ethan Walker getting shot and unfortunately not surviving. Although Tay-K was not the man in this crime, he was still charged with capital murder. But since Tay-K was only 16 years old at the time, he was still placed on house arrest while waiting for trial. But it gets worse for Tay-K. While he was on his 8th month of house arrest, he felt like the case was moving too slow and there were no updates. When he was finally informed by his lawyers about the changes, they told him the court was determining whether or not he should be tried as an adult. This of course would be alarming for a 16-year-old, and it was probably the reason why Tay-K did what he did. A decision that would send him down a much darker path where he was initially. You see, for his involvement in the tragic case, Tay-K was unfortunately charged with capital murder. And for someone who had capital murder charges on them, running away was the worst thing you could do. However, seeing as that Tay-K was more or less a 16-year-old child who was in over his head, he was yet to fully understand that there were consequences for his horrible actions. And fearing for his life and freedom, Tay-K tried to book it. But like the naive kid he was, just before he cut off his ankle monitor, Tay-K announced what he was about to do. Fuck this house arrest shit, fuck 12, they gonna have to catch me on Hood. After uploading that, Tay-K went on the run as he headed for New Jersey. And to his credit, Tay-K hid well, because it actually took the feds 3 months to catch up to him. However, before he was placed behind bars, he sent out a now iconic tweet, writing, "Feds can't hold me back, here go, Tay-K the Race music video, free Tay-K, free Santana, free Pimpies." But this was not just another tweet. Attached to the link was Tay-K's song, The Race, and the rest is history. You see, The Race wasn't just any other music video. It had the visuals of Tay-K flashing guns, throwing up gang signs, and smoking weed. Not only that, the whole music video was recorded while he was on the run, which further elevated its notoriety. But that's not all. Of course, as you can guess by now, the music video was an instant viral hit on social media. I mean, if you were around during those times, fans went absolutely crazy for the song, and they still do, to be honest. See, the reason why this tweet became iconic was because his imprisonment would have some extremely fruitful results for his career. And this is where the story gets wilder, because while he was behind bars, The Race peaked at number 44 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song got so big that it got several remixes from some of the biggest rappers in the modern era, such as 21 Savage, Lil Yachty, Tyga, and many more. Tay-K was that big. And of course, with this much traction, this prompted fans to start posting #FreeTayK all over social media. But when the details of Tay-K's crimes while on the run surfaced, Tay-K's chance at freedom went down the drain. You see, on April 23rd of 2017, while he was still on the run from the authorities, Tay-K did something that would define his entire future.
The parking lot of a Chick-fil-A turned crime scene. The restaurant closed for business like it usually is on Sundays. But that didn't stop witnesses and spectators from gathering to figure out what happened at the lot just across from North Star Mall early this evening.
However, compared to the previous cases where he was just either slightly involved or was more or less an accomplice, this time, TK's hands were all over the crime. This incident happened at a Chick-fil-A in San Antonio, and of course, TK's streak of violence while on the run was only getting started. You see, TK being on the run with nothing to his name made him want money and want it fast. Unfortunately, a 23-year-old photographer named Mark Saldivar came across TK and one of his friends. Mark was approached by TK where they tried to lure the photographer into their SUV to try and steal his camera and other photography equipment. However, the robbery went wrong because against all odds, Mark somehow managed to escape the SUV and started screaming for help. And in a merciless act, TK hit the accelerator and tried to, but Mark wasn't ready to give up since he proved to be sturdier than they expected. But unfortunately for Mark, who was just at the wrong place at the wrong time and was simply fighting to get away, he did something that would cost him his life. While trying to defend himself, Mark jumped onto the SUV's hood and started kicking the windscreen. And this is where TK finally had enough. You see, after Mark fought back, TK got out of the car and did the one thing that would seal both of their fates forever. TK shot Mark, who tragically did not survive. After that, TK and his friend drove away thinking that it didn't matter if there were any witnesses who saw them commit that crime. But the CCTV footage on the streets told a different story. Because fortunately, the harrowing moment when Mark fought back and kicked their SUV's windscreen was actually caught by the CCTV. And the surveillance footage matched their vehicle, along with a smashed up windscreen. However, TK still wasn't done. Because on May 25th of 2017, a month after he killed Anthony Saldivar in cold blood, TK struck again.
A 65-year-old man is out of the hospital and recovering at home tonight after being robbed and beaten in an Arlington park.
Skip Pepe says he was walking in Cravens Park 2 weeks ago in the middle of the day when a young man pulled a gun on him. Pepe says the man quickly turned violent.
It's wild to think about, isn't it? While Skip Pepe was out for a leisurely walk, TK, who was 16 at the time, didn't even stop to think that he was attacking someone old enough to be his grandfather. Skip recalled the brutal incident and said,
"And I was trying to make my way, not running, but walking real fast, and I'm waving him, trying to wave him down, and say, stop! I'm being robbed! Help me! And that's the last thing I remember."
But that's not all. Take a look at how TK violated this poor old man. By the way, of course I can't show without censoring.
Arlington police say Pepe was assaulted and robbed. These are pictures of him just hours after the attack. He has bleeding on the brain, numerous scrapes and bruises, and 3 fractured ribs. He says he may have been dragged.
After TK robbed Pepe and left him for dead, TK felt unstoppable. But little did he know that his reign of terror was coming to an end. You see, on June 30th of 2017, about a month after assaulting Pepe, the authorities finally arrested TK as the wanted rapper, who was arrested without incident at 2 p.m. Friday. So TK couldn't finish the race after all. And it got worse for TK, because in August of 2017, 2 months after being caught, the courts decided that TK would be tried as an adult. The judge ruled that the case could be moved to the adult court based on his age and the fact that the juvenile court will lack jurisdiction soon. However, that's not all. On March 8th of 2018, TK was denied bond, and the online sentiments and the #FreeTK hashtags worked against his favor because the judge said, "It's my understanding that people throughout this country have free TK signs up or go-to funds to fund his defense, and this court has a problem with that." He added, "I don't know what this country has become when people go out and allegedly commit heinous crimes and be glorified for it." But anyways, if you remember around this time, there were talks on social media that TK was going to face the death penalty for his many crimes. However, his manager quickly cleared that up and said, "Oh yeah, and ain't no death penalty over here, free TK." But TK couldn't even celebrate as he got hit with another lawsuit after another. Just like in June 21st, 2018, when Mark Anthony Saldivar's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against him and asked for $1 million in damages from TK. So TK, who was already in a sticky situation, would be on his best behavior while awaiting trial. However, TK did the opposite of that. You see, while in jail, TK was charged with felony possession of prohibited substances. The charge stems from a cell phone that was discovered tucked into a pair of the rapper's socks during the search. After that, he was moved to solitary confinement because TK got into a fight with a fellow inmate. But it got worse. TK's decision to release the race backfired horribly. Remember Ethan Walker, their victim in the botched home invasion that led to TK's house arrest in the first place? Well, it was used in the sentencing of TK. And on July of 2019, TK was sentenced to 55 years in prison. And we're probably not seeing TK until he's 74 years old, which is really crazy if you think about it. And he still has other cases looming over him. But you can attribute TK's downfall to his immaturity, recklessness, and just inexperience. Our next rapper's demise was simply due to his own carelessness and arrogance. And we're talking about AR-AB. Born on September 26, 1982 in Philadelphia, Abdul West, aka AR-AB, had a normal upbringing. In fact, ARAB's parents were religious and always encouraged him to avoid the streets. Sadly, their advice fell on deaf ears because he couldn't help but be drawn to the gang culture, and his lifestyle would dictate the better and worst parts of his life. It all began as soon as he left home. At just 16 years old, AR-AB left the safety of his home and started living in the streets. Fortunately for him, he had an undeniable talent for writing and rhyming, and so he became a battle rapper. In fact, he was so talented that he was even featured on Cassidy's mixtapes in 2007. This was huge, since Cassidy was an established rapper in the Philly scene, blowing up and going gold with his debut album, Split Personality, in 2004. However, all this potential would go to waste just a year later when the two were involved in a life-changing event that would haunt AR-AB in the coming years. You see, back in 2005, Cassidy was preparing to release his I'm a Hustler track. While preparing, his phone suddenly rang. He checked it and saw that he got a phone call from AR-AB. However, it wasn't just a normal call. Apparently, AB called Cassidy to inform him that one of their guys had been jumped by someone. But after calling Cassidy, AR-AB didn't just want to sit there and wait. He wanted immediate results. So, wanting vengeance for his boy, he spun around the block. While driving around town, he allegedly found the person responsible for putting hands on his friend and gave him a case of the beats in retaliation. Fortunately, before the altercation got much worse, the rival gang wanted to reach out to AR-AB to de-escalate the situation. So a person named Desmond Hawkins called AR-AB and tried to apologize. In the phone call between AR-AB and Desmond, AR-AB told the latter to stop by Cassidy's house later that night so they could talk it out. Desmond, unaware of what was actually happening, took AR-AB up on the offer and agreed to meet them. Little did he know, this decision would backfire badly, not only for Desmond, but for AR-AB and Cassidy as well. You see, although AR-AB agreed to having a peaceful conversation, what Desmond was not aware of was that AR-AB had some evil intentions behind his offer. Unbeknownst to Desmond, AR-AB hid a gun outside the bushes. So, by 9:30 p.m., Desmond Hawkins and two other guys pulled up to squash their beef, or so they thought. Because while the three were confident that the beef would be squashed then and there, AR-AB had different ideas of what would happen. In a tense moment, AR-AB walked up to their car and somehow, Desmond and AB's supposed peace meeting turned hostile. Of course, with tensions rising, it could only go two ways. Sadly, once tensions reached a boiling point, things went towards the worst possible direction. While things were getting heated, AR-AB backed up and grabbed the gun hidden in the bushes. And as you can already guess, the rest is history. Sadly, Desmond Hawkins did not survive. Not only that, his two friends were also harmed. Fortunately for the other two, they were treated at hospitals for the gunshot wounds and released. So now, AR-AB had blood on his hands. However, not only did he take Desmond's life, AB also placed Cassidy's rap career in jeopardy. Seeing that AR-AB had a reputation in the streets and who he associated with, it was only a matter of time before the cops pieced together what happened. And on June 17th of 2005, Philadelphia authorities put out posters for both Cassidy and AR-AB's arrest for Desmond Hawkins' murder. AR-AB went on the run before being caught 2 weeks later in Ohio. Meanwhile, Cassidy, who was unfortunately and unwillingly involved in the tragic incident, turned himself in immediately. And unsurprisingly, AB and Cassidy had completely different ways of fighting their murder case. You see, the two people that came with Desmond testified that Cassidy was only arrested because Desmond got killed in front of his house. So, although he was in hot water, Cassidy settled as he pleaded to involuntary manslaughter with an 11-month sentence. But how about AB? Well, in a wild decision that could have and should have ended badly for him, AR-AB chose to escalate the case to trial. Keep in mind that this was a very risky move, considering that there were two witnesses who not only saw the crime happen firsthand, but were also victims of AR-AB. However, AR-AB's notoriety came in handy, because he knew just how much fear he imposed in the streets of Philly. So he knew the two wouldn't testify against him because of his feared reputation. And after just 2 years, AB finally beat his trial in 2007 with no charges at all. And it was actually insane, because at the end of this entire ordeal, Cassidy, who simply owned the house where the tragic incident happened and had nothing to do with the actual shooting, became a convicted felon. Meanwhile, AR-AB, despite allegedly killing someone and injuring two people, walked out with no criminal record at all. After all of this, as for Cassidy, he served his sentence, went home, and started his own label. Miraculously, despite everything that had happened, Cassidy also promised to turn AR-AB into a star. However, Cassidy didn't expect that the cost of maintaining a rap label would be that expensive. So, he had no choice but to sideline AR-AB and prioritize himself first. After all, he was the one who went to prison and got a felony on his record. But of course, the question is, how did AB react to this? Well, to the surprise of no one, AR-AB felt some type of way after being sidelined. So he started to beef with his best friend because he felt that Cassidy got his hopes up for nothing. However, luckily for Cassidy, he had already moved to New York before he became a victim of AR-AB's wrath. And in the end, AR-AB knew he had to change his methods if he wanted to make it. So now, left without someone to help his rap career, and with no traction in the industry, AB turned to the next best or worst thing: selling illegal substances. In a really ironic turn of events, AR-AB's plug stopped doing business with him. With this, he took it upon himself to sell substances. And this is where his criminal empire started to take off. A couple years down the line, AR-Ab formed the OBH, which stands for Original Block Hustlers. This company served as AR-Ab's record label, but unbeknownst to many, OBH actually served as a front for AR-Ab's illegal activities. And when his little brother, Lick Moss, saw the lifestyle that his big brother had and how lucrative and exciting it was, Lick immediately was drawn to it. So the two teamed up and operated OBH together. You see, while Ab moved substances, his criminal network started to get bigger. And before he knew it, OBH had a couple of foot soldiers at its disposal. Furthermore, while doing this, AR-Ab started to get notoriety as a rapper and began releasing several successful mixtapes that began to get him some buzz. Seeing the big opportunity come up, Ab had two choices: continue his rap career or keep growing his empire. Well, the sad truth was that AR-Ab had already made up his mind. He chose to double down on the gangster lifestyle. In his eyes, he already had everything he could ever want: the street cred, the huge sums of money, and the power and influence to live as a real gangster. Also, he didn't like having a boss or a label to answer to.
I'm not the king of Philly, I'm the king of everything, man. I ain't the king of Philly, I'm the king of everywhere. I'm independent for real. I'm independent, I'm not myself, I don't have no boss. I've never had a boss in my life.
And from there, the self-proclaimed king of Philly terrorized the streets. Sadly for AR-Ab, he made the wrong choice. While choosing to continue on with his criminal activities, he solidified his way of life even more. However, all good things come to an end, and in September of 2011, luck was not on AR-Ab's side, and this time, AR-Ab himself was on the receiving side of the negative effects of the lifestyle that he was living. That fateful day, he was shot 10 times by his ops in the stomach, hand, thigh, knees, and leg area. But the thing is, despite being responsible for some of the worst crimes imaginable, AR-Ab still had a guardian angel. And it just so happened that his guardian angel had been working overtime, because despite receiving almost a dozen bullets throughout his entire body, AR-Ab pulled through and lived a couple of days later. The funny thing was that, as soon as he got conscious, he immediately went back to business as usual. He even took to Twitter to proudly tell the world, "I'm in the hospital right now, I got shot 10 times, Allah bless me to still be alive. I appreciate all the love and support." But the question is, who, out of probably hundreds of people AR had crossed, was the one responsible for putting him in the hospital? Funnily enough, in an interview with DJ Vlad, AR-Ab claimed that he had no idea who was behind the hit.
I never really found out who shot me because, well, I've been into a lot of shit, so I keep it all real.
Hilariously enough, he also snitched on his own activities, a habit that may cause him some trouble later down the line.
I robbed a couple niggas, took some bricks from some people. Recently, right before that, like I've been around a lot of people who do a lot of bad shit.
But anyway, after a close call with death, was it enough to get Ab to change his ways? Well, of course not. This is AR-Ab we're talking about. However, if a dozen bullets was not enough to get him, was there anything that could ever put an end to Ab's reign of terror? The answer is, there actually is. And it's the same thing that has led to the downfall of most gang members nowadays: self-snitching. You see, in the streets, there are few things that are looked down upon more than snitching. Yet ironically, we've seen too many of these rappers incriminate themselves in 4K. So what happens when you constantly snitch on yourself? Well, no matter how hard AR-Ab tried to stop himself from telling in front of the camera, he failed to do so most of the time. In fact, his self-snitching habits got so bad that there are actually compilations on YouTube of AR-Ab incriminating himself and his friends in 4K. Here's the first clip of many.
Motherfucking you fucking cock blowers, you cowards, man. Come see us, man. I swear to God, you come down this block, you gonna get filled up with so much fucking smoke, nobody gonna make it off the fucking block. You come down this block, is nobody gonna make it off this fucking block, man.
I mean, on first listen, it sounds like just how many rappers rap nowadays, but when someone who has an actual reputation in the street says it, it's not hard to understand why the authorities gave close attention to AR-Ab's operations, especially when he said things like this.
Man, I promise you won't make it off this motherfucking block, man. On everything I love, you come up on us, man, you're not gonna make it. Niggas gonna blow your clean off, man.
But Ab didn't just incriminate himself. He also did it to his friends.
Y'all know who he is. This is my little brother, Skinny Me. The notorious Skinny Me. That boy about 130 pounds of horror.
See, while this just sounds like the usual way of hyping your bros up, there was actually a problem with this. Because the fact was that Skinny Me, the guy that AR-Ab was talking about, was already under the watchful eye of the police due to his and AR-Ab's alleged involvement in a prior murder. So I don't know what Ab was thinking, or maybe he just didn't care when he said,
and guess what? This is what I like about Skinny Me. This is what I like about Skinny Me music, man. It's just raw. And it's like reality rap. The mafia.
And he even announced that him and Skinny were actually being watched by the authorities.
Skinny Me would go through a situation, and guess what? It's gonna be in the song. He's gonna make a song about it the same day.
It would have been fine maybe if he stopped there, but he had more to say.
So I know, that's why I feel it so much. I know it.
A reckless anthem.
When he said I killed the nigga,
and I did that. I seen him do it.
If that isn't incriminating yourself and your friend, then I don't know what is. So telling a camera that you saw Skinny Me, your friend, kill someone with your own eyes is wild. And as you can guess, the comments had a field day with it. One fan said, "When he said I seen him do it, the whole vibe changed in the room." But that's not all. There's a reason why Arab has a reputation. There's a reason why 2 witnesses from the Desmond Hawkins case that got shot by Arab and survived refused to testify against him. And it was because Arab was a demon in the streets who threatened anyone no matter what.
I don't give a if a kid 1 or 40. I don't give a about a nigga mom, pop.
We come to daycares.
That's the art of war, man. You hear me? I don't care about nothing. We ain't got no pics over this joint, man. I don't want to hit a nigga where it hurt. It's one thing about me. Call it on. I'm gonna hit you where it hurt. I promise you, man. Put that on my mom.
If you think that's all, no, it gets worse.
I went to war with the most dangerous people in my neighborhood. I went to their block. And we came to their block, and there was 6 of us. We was going to murder everybody on the corner, right?
Telling the story of how you shot up a block is one thing. I mean, definitely is something. But this next part of his story was just ridiculous.
I didn't know one of my friends was on the corner, and we fired on the corner. And guess who's on the corner? One of my friends was on the corner I fired on.
But Arab wasn't done self-snitching, because when the chance presented him to incriminate his friend, once again, he didn't waste any time doing so.
Turn the camera that way. No Grace Bros was on that corner.
Facts.
What happened to Grace Bros?
Man.
At this point, it felt like his friend knew what Ab was doing would bite them back later, so he just chuckled nervously.
Let this fly. And I got the f out of there. I'm gonna keep it a beam, man. You know, Allah was with me. You know what I'm saying? Because them boys was about 7, 8 deep.
And you can even tell just how baffled and shocked his friend was. And if you want to know how it feels to be a part of his gang, this comment summed it up nicely. Imagine being his homie. You start sweating every time you have an interview. But it wasn't just in amateur footage that we saw Arab take part in his patented self-snitching. Because for some reason, he wanted the entire world to know all the criminal activities that he and his gang were involved in. Because when he appeared for an interview with DJ Vlad, Arab just couldn't help but snitch.
I made a lot of money. Not like drug lord, big meat money. I made hundreds of thousands of dollars on the street. I got little cousins, little brother who was already just people.
And Arab had more to say.
We had a rap group of like 4 or 5 artists, man. 2 of them in jail for right now. 2 different right now. And these happen to be the same guys I was with when me and Cassie got locked up for the murder.
To many, it was baffling how loose Arab's tongue was, and we can probably chalk it up to plain ignorance or confidence, because when heinous individuals make moves, ideally, they try their best to move as discreetly as possible, right? Well, Arab didn't get the memo, because once you aim the camera at him, he just starts snitching. And the worst was when he announced that he would run up on a rival gang on camera.
20th Street all the way to Broad Street.
It's an epidemic.
We might take a block on the other side of Broad Street. I might put some work out there. Be on 20th Street. I'm thinking about going to 10th Street. Nobody gonna do nothing about it anyway once we get over there.
And there's still more clips.
You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, I did a lot of shit, man. I used to like, you know, I had a little spree where I was, I robbed a couple niggas, tied niggas up and all. I had a little run with that. You know what I'm saying?
So he basically admitted to robbing people and tying them up. That's interesting. But eventually, to the sigh of relief from his victims, all of Arab's recklessness and sinister actions would catch up to him. Because in 2018, his crimes and those committed by OBH would all unravel in the worst way possible. You see, apparently when you keep incriminating yourself in front of camera, the authorities might just make a credible case to stop you dead in your tracks. And that's exactly what happened to Ab and OBH. For all their crimes and self-snitching, Arab and his crew were charged for their significant role in Philly's drug trafficking scene. But it was far worse for Ab, because on October 18th of 2018, the US Attorney's Office announced that a superseding indictment was unsealed today, charging 9 members of a drug trafficking organization with multiple counts related to the distribution of large quantities of drugs in North Philadelphia, including cocaine, crack, meth, and heroin. That's a lot of changes, but that's not all. The authorities also claimed that according to the superseding indictment, West is the leader of a local gang, and each of the defendants is a member or associate of the gang. This meant that they zeroed in on Abdul West, or Arab, as the leader of OBH, and this all culminated in Arab's sentencing. You see, in 2021, the law finally handed down their verdict on Ab. Abdul West, 38, of Brookhaven, Pennsylvania, was sentenced to 45 years in prison, 10 years of supervised release, and ordered to pay $5,000 of fines by the US District Judge for his role as the leader of the OBH gang, a violent drug trafficking organization that doubled as a group of aspiring rap artists in Philadelphia. This means that by the time A$AP walks free, he'll be in his 80s. However, it gets darker. Do you remember Skinny Me? The guy he claimed to know for a fact he did something?
Man, and I seen him do it. I know he did it for a fact. I believe he's gonna make millions of dollars off of Skinny Me.
Well, he's also charged with a life sentence. And once you see how AB talked about Skinny in his interviews, it's not hard to see why.
Situations in the street situation that calls for Skinny to get brutal. And I watched him get brutal. And every time I called him and needed him to get brutal for me, he came with a smoking gun.
Well, he's also charged with a life sentence. And once you see how AB talked about Skinny in his interviews, it's not hard to see why.
And then he went and cashed everything. If I say Skinny get in the car and go catch a triple murder, I understand he's gonna do it.
For our next rapper turned criminal, let's shift to someone whose streak of crimes led him to not just a simple prison sentence, but to a supermax prison. It's that bad. And we're of course talking about Rod Diggs. See, Rod Diggs' experiences with death and crimes happened at a tragically young age. At just 12 years old, Ronald Heron, or Rod Diggs, saw his friend to death by cops. What's worse was that the friend wasn't killed for doing crime. No, they were just playing around with a toy rifle. After seeing this, Rod Diggs sunk deeper into the underbelly of Brooklyn's violent streets. A year after his friend's death, at just the ripe age of 13, Rod Diggs was caught for robbery. And sadly, this would be the start of Rod Diggs' deep run towards the criminal life. By 1998, 4 years after the incident, Rod Diggs was a full-fledged member of the Bloods. After seeing his mother work tirelessly, he wanted to take matters into his own hands and became the family's breadwinner. But of course, seeing that Rod Diggs was around 17 to 18 at this point, with barely a degree or any experience working 9 to 5 jobs, Rod resorted to utilizing what he thought he was good at, pushing substances and committing crime. At just 18 years old, Rod Diggs built a trafficking network and began moving substances. However, Rod wasn't your average dealer, as crime was not the only thing on his mind. He also showed an interest in making music, and Rod was actually talented. In fact, Rod's biggest song titled Eulogy actually made waves in the rap scene, managing to rake up 1 million views. By all means, Rod could rap. However, instead of focusing on music, Rod just couldn't leave the criminal lifestyle that he lived, which of course would spell trouble. Not for just his victims, but for Rod Diggs himself. So how exactly did Rod Diggs' troubles and bouts with the legal system start? Well, it all started with the botched drug deal. You see, a deal involving Rod Diggs went south. This resulted in Rod Diggs being shot in the leg and getting hospitalized. However, this obviously did not sit well with him. The fact was that the shooter missed his chance to end Rod's life, a mistake that would be fatal. Because although Rod was hospitalized, it did not stop him from enacting revenge. While he was at the King County's hospital, Rod arranged a hit on the person responsible, and in the end, the hit was carried out successfully by his cousins. But Rod Diggs was just getting started. A year later, Rod Diggs would get into another altercation with a rival dealer, Frederick Brooks. You see, Brooks allegedly ignored Rod's demands for him to pack up and leave, and because of that, all hell broke loose. Rod gunned Brooks down in a full view of several witnesses as he shot the rival in the multiple times. Of course, the crime scene was truly brutal. Even if Rod took precaution to make sure that the crime didn't lead back to him, it wasn't enough to escape the law. A month after Brooks' death, Rod Diggs was arrested by the NYPD and charged with murder. However, here's where it got wilder. You see, Rod Diggs and other potential suspects were asked to line up, which led to eyewitnesses positively identifying Rod as the culprit. However, the witnesses later recanted their statements because Rod's crew threatened him. So, because they feared for their lives, Rod was acquitted of the murder charges. Not only that, this incident helped solidify Rod Diggs' reputation within the New York criminal underworld. But somewhere along the lines, even someone as powerful as Rod Diggs could not evade the law and would serve prison time for drug possession. Although his time away from his operations wouldn't be long, and he eventually got out in July of 2007. By this time, he was already a high-ranking Bloods member and led the infamous MMD, and I'm just gonna let you Google what that stands for. And of course, once Rod was released from prison, he set out to reclaim his territory and targeted anyone who questioned his leadership or threatened his trafficking operation. From here on out, Rod Diggs would go on a long, bloody, and at times ridiculous reign of terror. And when I say ridiculous, well, there's a reason for that. There's a hilarious detail on how Rod Diggs carried his hits out. He allegedly told his goons to go undercover wearing wigs, makeup, and dressing in women's clothes to get close to their targets. And it didn't end there, because apparently, Rod practiced as he preached, meaning that allegedly, Rod also used to cross-dress and disguise himself in makeup to commit crimes undetected, which just shows how far Rod and his crew were willing to go to defeat their ops, even resorting to wearing women's clothes, a big no-no in their culture. Now, despite seeming untouchable, Rod obviously had his own flaws, one of which was pride. You see, if there's one thing that Rod Diggs didn't like, it was when someone called him out and questioned his authority. So when Richard Russo did exactly that, Rod made sure to let him know he was the wrong person to mess with. On May 9th of 2008, a year after Rod's release, he forced Russo into an elevator and him. And he didn't do it very nicely either. Let's just leave it at that because this is YouTube. After that, he got rid of the gun he used to cover his tracks. So Ra really didn't like it when people questioned his decisions. But it gets worse. After Ra got rid of Russo, he set his eyes on Kendall Robinson, or King Trell, as known in the streets for being Ra's rival in the drug business. This battle was critical for Diggs, because not only was King Trell rivaling Diggs in terms of power, King Trell's methods also clashed with Ra's operations. So of course, to address this issue, Diggs ordered his goons to end King Trell, and they almost got away with this, managing to hit Trell multiple times with a... However, against all odds, King Trell survived the attack but was later thrown in jail for a separate crime. But Ra Diggs and his crew weren't immune to retaliation. I mean, other gangs wouldn't just sit there and let Ra run rampant on them. So of course, someone had to let Ra know his crew wasn't untouchable at all. And on November 9th of 2008, Ra discovered just that. That day, a man named Victor Sabata, who was a member of a rival gang, gave Ra Diggs and his crew quite a tough time. During a tense drug territory dispute, Diggs' partner and top lieutenant, Georgie Mejia, got shot 5 times after a confrontation with Victor. Although Mejia survived, Ra made sure to avenge his friend. It took them a year to finally track down Victor, and once they found him, he showed no mercy. He killed Sabata in a courtyard by shooting him multiple times. This incident caused Ra's notoriety to skyrocket, further solidifying control over his territory. However, this would be the start of Ra Diggs' luck to slowly run out. As I mentioned, Diggs' crime rampage was bloody, long, and publicized. With the way that Ra Diggs and his MMD crew were moving, they caught the attention of the NYPD and US Marshals. See, because of the way that he and his crew were winning their territory disputes, Ra Diggs was feeling untouchable. Little did he know, the authorities had already launched a full-blown surveillance operation to gather evidence needed to finally put him behind bars. And on October 5th, 2010, that's exactly what they did. You see, while Ra Diggs and his crew hung around Club Amnesia in Manhattan, they somehow forgot to secure their location, meaning that they didn't know who the people surrounding them actually were, although they would soon find out. Once Diggs exited his vehicle, the authorities swarmed Ra Diggs as they arrested the leader of the Mad Dogs and charged him with multiple counts of racketeering, trafficking, and you guessed it, a long list of. And this was the exact moment when Ra's drug empire finally met its end. And while Diggs and his crew's reckless moves and actions gave the authorities plenty of solid evidence, Diggs' crimes weren't what solely put him on the authorities' radar. Like some of AR-Rab and TK, Ra Diggs also snitched on himself as his rap lyrics were pretty self-incriminating. Of course, self-snitching on your tracks is the dumbest thing you can do. And for someone who's always touted as a smart person like Ra Diggs, he would place himself in jeopardy due to that. Do you remember when Ra got shot in the leg and placed a hit on the guy responsible? Well, he also rapped about it in Live by the Gun. He shot me 5 times, 2 days later, he died. Sound familiar? Well, that's because the court later used those lyrics to prove that he murdered someone back in the day. But it gets worse, because Ra also shouted out his MMD crew in one of his lyrics, and he even bragged about how he placed the hits and that his crew carried it out for him. I mean, he was practically doing the feds' work for themselves at this point. What's worse is that most of his music videos featured the same projects where nearly all the crimes took place. Oh, and did I forget to mention that he referenced Brooks and Zabata's in his lyrics? As you can imagine, this would only strengthen the case against Ra in court. Finally, by February 13th of 2012, Ra Diggs was indicted for his crimes, namely racketeering, multiple conspiracies, robberies, firearms possessions, and narcotics distribution. And don't get me wrong, Ra probably could have chosen to focus on rap at any point in time, but the streets had a different kind of grip on him. 2 years later, he was convicted of 21 counts with testimonies from over 50 witnesses. And what makes it worse or better, depending on how you look at it, is that most of them were his former associates from the streets. So with the amount of crimes done, how many years do you think Ra got locked away for? 50 years, 70 years, 100 years? You gotta think better than that. You see, Ra Diggs got 12 life sentences. Yeah, 12. I'll let you think about that for a minute. But let's say Ra somehow serves all of that. Is prison time finally over for him? Well, not quite. Because along with 12 life sentences, he also has to serve 105 years additional to that. So how did Ra Diggs respond after being handed that type of punishment? Ra told the judge, "You can sentence me to 10 life sentences, but I am only going to die one time. God have mercy on all of us." After sentencing him, the judge only had one thing to say to Ra Diggs. There's not an ounce of remorse in his body, the judge said before handing down the mandatory terms. Ra Diggs sits in ADX Florence, a supermax prison in Colorado, which is widely regarded as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. To make it worse, the inmates in ADX Florence aren't just your run-of-the-mill criminals, because the supermax prison houses criminals like El Chapo, the Boston Marathon bomber, and many more notorious criminal figures.
In an exclusive interview, a former warden and a former inmate tell us is easier than life at the federal supermax.
It is as isolated as the prisoners who call it home. The prison, called ADX Florence, is a tomb for the living.
To me, it's life after.
But that's not all. Even though you're on your best behavior in the supermax, that doesn't change the fact that you're confined to your cell 23 hours of the day. So although Raw Diggs had his fair share of crimes, he's technically the only rapper to ever be placed in ADX Florence, which is wild if you think about it. Now, our next criminal on our list is someone you probably already expected to see when you saw the title of the video. To no one's surprise, another member of rap's most dangerous criminals is none other than Suge Knight. See, Suge Knight got his name from having a large and broad physique, like a sugar bear. But in reality, Suge was anything but sweet. In fact, Suge had a bitter and tragic childhood as he grew up seeing crime around every corner. When he was only 5 years old, a young Suge Knight found a dead man with $5,000 on him. However, this would be the start of Suge's grimy actions, because being the hustler that he was, Suge actually took the $5,000 and split it with his mom. By the early 1990s, he began to work as a bodyguard for a lot of celebrities like Bobby Brown, and because of his physique, a lot of celebrities wanted Suge as their hired muscle. But this was where his violent nature truly flourished. You see, Suge had a well-documented and publicized bout with the legal system, even before he achieved his near-untouchable status as hip-hop's boogeyman. You see, Suge was terrorizing everyone. It all started in October of 1997, when he was arrested after A-wording his then-girlfriend. Of course, she filed a restraining order on Suge. However, this wouldn't matter since Suge already violated the order, not just by getting near the woman, but also by cutting her hair off in public. His crime spree, of course, did not end there. After a couple of months, he was arrested again and charged with attempted in a carjacking gone wrong when Suge tried to steal a Nissan Maxima. The robbery ended with Suge firing at the driver. So Suge pled guilty to all the charges and was only sentenced to 2 years of probation. Now, I don't know much about the law, but dodging prison time after what Suge did is wild. Anyways, 3 years after the incident, Suge didn't let up and continued his violent crimes. You see, Suge obviously had some anger issues. Who would have known? Well, his next victim would eventually know how bad Suge's anger issues were, because allegedly, Suge had an intense encounter with someone and they ended up with a broken jaw. And can you guess how many years of jail time this amounted to? 0. Suge got hit with a $9,000 fine with a 2-year suspended sentence. However, the question is, with such a bad temper as well as a negative reputation, so how in the world did Suge Knight even break into the music industry? Well, in the late 1980s, Suge Knight entered the music industry as a concert promoter and a bodyguard for celebrities such as Bobby Brown. Eventually in 1989, Suge managed to launch his own music publishing company. However, everything changed for Suge when he came across a man named Vanilla Ice. You see, Suge had a music associate named Mario Chocolate Johnson, who claimed to have written a certain song named Ice Ice Baby. This song in particular was a song that Vanilla Ice performed and helped propel him into a star. And this is where things get sticky, because the problem was that Suge couldn't help but notice that he wasn't getting a slice of the pie from Vanilla Ice, seeing that his associate allegedly helped write the song. Makes sense, right? Well, allegedly, to get a share of the pie, Suge met up with Vanilla in a hotel, and this started one of the most iconic urban legends in music history.
And Winkle describes a terrifying night in his suite at a Beverly Hills hotel, when he says Suge Knight showed up with 6 other men.
Apparently, all I'm gonna say is Suge put the balcony to good use.
Did you do that? No, I did not.
It never happened?
Never happened.
You didn't take him out to the balcony?
How that sound?
It sounds like what occurs in other police reports involving you. Again and again, there's a pattern, Mr. Knight, where you do that.
That's not true.
And although Vanilla Ice maintained that it didn't happen, to which some say that it was because Vanilla still feared Suge, and I can't blame him. And afterwards, Suge Knight's power only grew larger after the inception of Death Row Records. And once again, he caught another charge when he was caught again for carrying deadly weapons in Beverly Hills. But there's more where that came from. You see, nothing was out of bounds for Suge when it came to getting what he wanted. The same goes for the time that he wanted to get Dr. Dre out of Ruthless Records. The thing is, Dre himself was reported to have wanted to leave Ruthless and NWA for a long time, so Suge wanted to vulture his way into the situation and swoop Dre from Ruthless. However, no matter how hard Suge and his crew tried, Eazy-E, who was running Ruthless Records at the time, didn't bend to Suge's demands. This of course did not sit well with Suge. So of course, Suge being Suge, allegedly threatened Eazy-E's family just to release Dr. Dre's contract, which eventually worked, as Dre was let loose from his contract with Ruthless Records, and thus Death Row Records was officially in business. But Suge's reign of terror didn't stop there. I know I've probably said that like 5 times already, but trust me, it does stop at some point. Because a year later, Suge Knight would be arrested again for concealing a weapon, as well as disturbing the peace. And that's not the worst of it. You see, according to the reports, Suge Knight commanded fear wherever he went, even in his own office. His temper was so bad that no one was safe, even those that didn't directly try to anger him. See, when George and Linwood Stanley, 2 aspiring rappers, went to Death Row's building to work with Dre, they unintentionally got into a dispute with Suge Knight. Either the Stanley brothers did not know who Suge was at the time, or they were just in over their heads, because instead of backing off, the brothers angered Suge even more. Of course, the Death Row Records mogul didn't take the disrespect, and so, in a moment of complete rage, Suge allegedly gave the brothers the beats, and even shot a gun near Linwood's ear. But it gets worse, and what he did after, I once again cannot say, but it was pretty bad, and very humiliating. Threatening the brothers that knew where they lived and would go to their homes if they reported the incident, to to the police. Fortunately, the Stanley brothers didn't end up in a body bag just because Suge felt particularly giving that day. Still, the Stanley brothers, after leaving the building with a brutal case of the beats and without a lot of their clothes, immediately reported the incident to the police. However, as you can expect by now, the charges were eventually dropped. Some say that it was dropped because Suge used his connections to try and sway the prosecutors, which is what likely happened. Anyway, sit tight because Suge Knight's crime spree didn't end there. You see, in 1993, Suge Knight's name was mentioned in a drug trafficking ring that moved cocaine from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. But what was baffling was that despite the strong evidence against him, Suge still evaded jail time. As always, Suge only received additional probation. But 3 years after this incident, one of hip-hop's most historic moments happened. That year, the East Coast and West Coast rivalry reached a breaking point. And of course, seeing that Death Row Records was arguably the West Coast's biggest label, Suge and Tupac by association were heavily involved in the battle. Hold on to this detail because it's going to be a crucial factor later on. On September 7th of 1996, the hip-hop world would be shaken to its core. Tupac and Suge Knight were seen driving away after watching a Mike Tyson fight in Las Vegas. Little did they know that this was the last time Tupac was seen alive. You see, while on the road, a white Cadillac pulled up and opened fire. Suge sustained minor injuries, but Tupac didn't make it. However, there was an obvious glaring issue with this moment. The fact was that Suge, given how physically big he was, had suspiciously only sustained minor injuries, while Tupac took most of the shots. This of course led to some theories about what actually happened. Of course, one theory was that someone from the East Coast, namely P. Diddy, had something to do with Tupac's passing. However, another theory suggests that Suge had set Tupac up, leading to Tupac's death. And somehow, the second theory actually has some solid footing to it. The fact is that when authorities first started to investigate the murder, Suge Knight was uncooperative. But it wasn't just him. A lot of witnesses also refused to give their statements. And I'm not going to go in depth about conspiracies, but at the end of the day, Suge Knight glamorized the gangster lifestyle that Tupac wanted to live. So even though he wasn't necessarily responsible for Tupac's death, you can't deny he played a role in the lead up to Tupac's murder on that fateful night. And if you still don't believe that Suge and Death Row Records' influence added more fuel to the fire, listen to what Snoop said about how the beef escalated.
By him being bailed out by Death Row Records, and Death Row Records adding more gasoline to the fire, and him being a part of the most gangsterous label in the world that his opposition didn't want no issues with.
Right.
It only egged it on as opposed to, let's find a resolution.
So after Tupac's untimely passing and escaping his death, do you think Suge changed his ways at all? Not really, because the year after Tupac's death, Suge Knight would finally face justice. However, for a different reason. You see, Suge violated his probation when he fought outside a Las Vegas nightclub in 1997. At first, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison, but that number was later reduced to only 5 years. And you already know the reason why. In one of the court hearings, the judge delivered a stern lecture in sentencing the 31-year-old Knight, saying that his violent history had made him a risk to society. After hearing about all his crimes so far, that's an understatement at best. But those 5 years would come to pass much quicker than expected. And in 2001, Suge Knight finally was free from prison, which was, I guess you could say, unfortunate for the world. So what was the first thing a free man like Suge did after serving his prison sentence? Well, he wasted no time and started sending death threats to none other than Eminem, out of all people. Yeah, Suge really was not going to stay free for long, was he? It seemed that way because Suge Knight again violated his probation. This time, it was because he moved to Malibu without telling his parole officer. And that's not all. Once the authorities raided Death Row Records' office, they found evidence that suggested that Suge was associated with known gang members, which was again another probation violation. For that, Suge spent 61 days in prison. 61, that's a pretty small punishment, right? But I guess if you're Suge Knight, the law bent to your power during those days. However, a year after he violated probation, Suge got into a fight with a parking valet outside a nightclub. And this wasn't another rapper or someone from the industry. Rather, it was an unfortunate civilian. An article said that Suge was apparently unhappy with his parking spot at the White Lotus Club, a club frequented by celebrities. Police said the Knight then violated the attendant from behind. And for that, he served a whopping 10 months in prison, which is a step up, I guess. But 2 years after his nightclub altercation, while driving around the streets, Suge chose a bad day to do an illegal U-turn. You see, when cops pulled him over, they found a boatload of funny grass in Suge's car, which again violated his parole. Now that I think about it, how many times can someone even violate parole? Anyway, because of that, he was thrown in jail for a week and placed on house arrest for 2 months. However, it was only about to get worse for Suge. That year, karma came back for Suge when he accidentally got shot at a Kanye West MTV Music Awards party. Of course, Suge wasn't gonna let this incident go. In fact, he actually sued Kanye for $1 million for what Suge said was mental and physical damages. Suge's camp said that West should have been prepared for a dangerous environment. Due to the much publicized hip-hop feud between East and West Coast of the US, spoiler alert, he lost the lawsuit when a judge dismissed it. But there's more to his long list of crimes, and this time it gets super embarrassing. See, in 2008, Suge got into a fight. Unfortunately for Suge, despite being as big and battle-tested as he was, he ended up getting knocked out. After that, Suge took another L, and this time, it was for disturbing and disgusting reasons. That year, Suge Knight was also arrested for allegedly doing something to his girlfriend, which I can't say, at 6:30 a.m. in the morning, when Las Vegas police all of a sudden interrupted. Knight was arrested and charged with battery, domestic violence with a deadly weapon, possession of a controlled substance, and possession of dangerous substances without a prescription. And that's one more crime added to the Suge Knight's long list of encounters with the law. Of course, it didn't stop there, and I promise you, we're actually almost at the end of this list. You see, in 2012, 4 years after his last incident, Suge was arrested for possession of funny grass and for driving with a suspended license. Not only that, police found multiple outstanding warrants for previous violations. So, Knight was placed on 3 years of unsupervised probation. A couple years later, funnily enough, Suge Knight was once again the target of another shooting at another MTV party. The difference was, it was Chris Brown who hosted the party, not Kanye. This time, Suge almost got taken from the world. According to reports, Suge got hit 6 times. He went through surgery and survived though. Of course, in true gangster fashion, Suge refused to talk to the cops about the details. So this brings us to 2015, which is the real turning point of Suge Knight's career. If you remember, this was the year when Straight Outta Compton, a biographical epic drama focused on the NWA, was set to release. And of course, they hired Suge Knight in as a consultant on the film for obvious reasons. However, as you can expect, tensions were high during filming, because before the situation got heated, Suge was asked to leave the set. And that was when Suge's friend, Terry Carter, told him to fix the situation with Dr. Dre. So Suge and Carter waited at the meeting place in their respective vehicles. But out of nowhere, Suge got jumped by a man named Clay Sloan, who also worked as a consultant on the film. The two had been beefing for quite some time now, so after seeing this, Carter got out of his car to try and stop the fight. But this decision would end fatally for him. You see, Suge proceeded to run both Sloan and Carter. Luckily for Sloan, he survived with minimal injuries. Unfortunately for Carter, he was not as lucky. He tragically passed away on the spot after Suge Knight drove over. Yeah, cannot show that footage or even say what else happened. This was the final straw for Suge. You see, on March of 2015, Suge Knight collapsed after he heard that his bail was set to a staggering $25 million.
To the man who was once the most feared figure in all of hip-hop. But here he is now, Suge Knight, a former rap powerhouse, collapsing in court, where he's facing a murder charge. The man who built an empire, founding Death Row Records, now facing life in prison.
But that's not all. He knew that he had nothing to say to justify his crimes in court. So what did Suge do? Well, he tried to claim several health issues like blindness and even having a brain tumor to stop the trial, but these were later proven to be nothing more than false claims to delay the inevitable. However, Suge was in fact hospitalized in 2017 because of blood clots, so his trial had to be moved again. But a year later, it was finally time for the hip-hop mogul to face the music. At first, he tried to claim self-defense. However, once the court saw the footage and witnesses started to describe the incident, it was over for Suge's freedom. Because on September 21st of 2018, the judge sentenced the disgraced music mogul Suge Knight to 28 years in prison for a fatal hit and run, bringing a curtain down on one of the most successful careers in hip-hop history. But Suge Knight decided to plead no contest to voluntary manslaughter.
Mr. LeBlanc, is that your understanding of the case settlement?
Yes, Your Honor, it'll be a no contest plea.
All right. Mr. Knight, is this what you want to do?
Yes.
A no contest plea is the same as a guilty plea. There's no difference. You understand that?
Yes.
In fact, he looked remorseless every time he appeared outside the trial. He was even seen smiling and waving at loved ones during his various court appearances. What's even more heartbreaking is what Terry Carter's wife said in response to this. "I will never witness Terry smiling at me again. All interactions with Terry ended on January 29th, 2015. All we have is memories." Although it took roughly 40 years after Suge Knight's first crime for his reign of terror to end, let's all be glad our favorite rappers aren't around someone like him in this day and age. Now, let's finally talk about one of the most notorious criminals in rap history, Davon Bennett, aka King Von. And I mean, I couldn't make a video titled Rap's Most Dangerous Criminals without making a video on the demon himself. See, King Von is deemed by many as demonic. In fact, people in hip-hop and gang culture sometimes call Von as the devil of O Block, and for valid reasons. You see, Von grew up in a rough neighborhood, surrounded by gang activity. His father, who was a well-known gangbanger, was a casualty of gang violence when Von was only 8 years old. Although King Von had good grades in school, the streets pulled him into a life of crime. And this is where he met and became close friends with Lil Durk, another rapper who had his own issues. This encounter led him into being offered to follow in his father's footsteps as a gang member. And since Von was already surrounded with that lifestyle, he got bored of getting good grades in school, and from there, Davon Bennett slowly transformed into King Von.
I just woke up one day, I was bad as hell. I don't know what the fuck happened. I was just getting good A's and B's. I don't know.
In Von's perspective, it was impossible to decline the offer, knowing how dangerous the area he lived at was due to gang violence. Because in that environment, if you weren't associated or a part of a gang, chances are you'd end up being targeted.
Like if you would have been born where I'm at, you would have had to been gang banged. just because that's what it is.
Fast forward to 2018, and by then, King Von wasn't just an ordinary gangbanger. No, he blew up and became Chicago's fastest rising star of that year. But despite all the money, cars, and fame, he just couldn't let the streets go. As the years went by, King Von racked up a long list of bodies, and sadly, his crime spree started while he was still a teenager. But don't get me wrong, King Von's crime record wasn't just filled with juvenile activities like stealing, DUIs, or other minor crimes. The fact was that before even becoming of legal age, Von was also incarcerated for allegedly being involved in an armed robbery. But thanks to his age, he got off lightly. However, that was just the beginning of his run-in with the law. You see, in the streets of Chicago, nobody was safe, and that included King Von and his fellow gang members. So when his close friend Tony Dunn was this was the catalyst for Von to start his spree, because the day Dunn died was the day King Von and his best friend T. Roy decided that they were going to make everyone pay, and the duo made sure to kill any op they came across. The revenge tour started on October 14th of 2012, when Von and T. Roy had a fateful encounter with an STL gang member named McCranby. On site, McCranby was shot dead by Von. Even though it took several years to confirm his involvement, it was reported that Von fired the fatal shot at McCranby back in 2012. There have even been several different accounts from eyewitnesses about who did it, and still the Chicago Police Department has attributed the murder to Von. And as you can expect by now, this was just the beginning of O Block's Devil's body count, and not body count that pertains to women. Despite the crime already being as grim as it was, Von took Demon Time to a whole different level. Because the thing is, King Von and T. Roy didn't simply go on a spree, they treated murder like a game, like a deer hunt, and to them, hunting season was on. Von wrote in a tweet, "I ain't been gang with T. Roy like that cause he been winning. I gotta catch up first. Give me till Friday, lol." Von basically stated that Roy was ahead of him in terms of bodies and that he wanted to catch up. So Von wasted no time and started his hunt. Because the day after that tweet, King Von caught Derek Johnson, otherwise known as P5 or Crack, and outside his home early in the morning. Despite being rushed to the hospital, it was too late for Derek, as the 16 wounds on him that, Von was responsible for were obviously too much for him. Unfortunately for everyone in the streets, King Von wasn't done. He moved with vengeance in his mind, shouting out all the friends he lost along the way, saying what he was doing was for them. Y'all ain't trying to win. I know OD, Pontoon, Steroid, and White. Them was my boys. I'm BD. I'm trying to win. However, Von wasn't just out to get his ops. In fact, he wanted to be as disrespectful as he could. Because to make things worse for his victims and their families, he referenced them in a tweet while also sending out hints that he wasn't done. Damn, Modell got killed in October and Crack. Who gonna get killed in November? Stay tuned. Man, this guy was acting like this is a TV show. King Von had a routine of incriminating himself, and this wasn't anything out of the ordinary. King Von had a routine of incriminating himself online whenever he took one of his ops down, and this habit continued on to his next victim. So King Von and T. Roy's kill streak was just heating up, and they weren't planning on ending it anytime soon. So on November 3rd of 2012, they got the drop on Boss T-Rel. The two O-Block friends pulled up on him and got him in one shot. T-Rel was taken into critical condition to Advocate Christ Medical Center. However, it wasn't enough to save him, as he was pronounced dead on 11:30 p.m. Thursday. And after Von got the best of T-Rel, what do you think he did next? Of course, Von opened his phone and took to Twitter to disrespect the recently deceased gang member. STL stands for Steady Taking L's. And if you're not convinced he was talking about Boss T-Rel, Von followed up his tweet with, "Lol, you ain't a boss to me." To add insult to the injury, King Von even made fun of how quickly his ops were dropping one by one. Lately, the ops been checking out like crazy. Y'all need to keep up the good work on BD. I ain't slowing up. With the amount of bodies Von had under his belt at one point, the best course of action would have been to lay low. But instead of doing that, he kept incriminating himself on Twitter. And this ended badly for King Von. Or so it should have. You see, instead of being caught for his obvious crimes, the authorities didn't manage to piece it all together. At least not yet. Despite Von literally giving out hints on social media. Still, the authorities did manage to nab Von for something, as he was arrested and sent to Cook County Jail, not for his alleged murders, but for unlawful firearm possession. It was around this time that he dropped out of high school and dedicated himself fully to the streets. And it's shocking to know that King Von was still in high school while he committed all of these crimes. That alone is crazy. But you know what's crazier? See, Von's sister said that once her brother gets out of jail, he'll start killing people again. LMFAO, my bro Von talking about when he come home, he's just gonna kill people. Ha ha ha, not that funny. And what's insane is that even Von's sisters seem to have sociopathic tendencies like her brother. And despite this insanely obvious tweet, the authorities still let Von walk away. After 2 years of prison time for the unlawful weapons possession, King Von was finally free. Here's a video of him cutting off his ankle monitor, showing that his house arrest days were over. And as you can already imagine, he went right back to business and started dissing his ops on Twitter. In one post, King Von even made a collage of his ops and made fun of them. That's crazy. But what happens when King Von meets his match? Well, meet Gakira Barnes, aka K.I. To put it simply, K.I. was Von's equal. If the Black Disciples had King Von, then the Gangster Disciples had K.I. as well. And she wasn't any ordinary gangbanger. K.I. had a reputation for being a female assassin that was allegedly involved in the death of O.D. Perry, one of King Von's BD friends. But OD Perry wasn't just another cherished member of the BD. What a lot of people don't know is Perry's the reason why the 6400 block of South King Drive became O Block, named after OD after he passed. As you can imagine, Von and all of O Block hated her for that. But the situation gets even crazier, since for some reason, King Von had an odd fixation for KI, as the two regularly mentioned each other in tweets ranging all the way back to 2012. Some exchanges were lighthearted and comedic, but as we get deeper into the story, their tweets had proved to be really morbid looking back on it now. Take for example this post by King Von where he basically said that KI better slide on him before he does it to her. You better run up on me cause I am gonna run up on you, I don't got aim. To which KI expressed the same sentiments, saying, me neither, I was not trying to pop that. KI also posted a tweet that said, whoever retweets it thinks that she looks good. You can easily see that King Von retweeted it. But this wasn't the end of King Von jokingly flirting with KI on Twitter. You see, in a long series of tweets, he replied to KI and said, lol Kyra, ain't no lame, I think I love you. But that's not all. He also greeted her saying, good afternoon, wifey. But the romantic banter on social media stopped after Von got locked up in 2012. However, once he got out, what did Von do first? Link up with his crew, get active in the streets? Nope, none of that. In fact, the first thing he did was tweet at her. He mentioned her and wrote, what's up ma, you don't miss me? To which KI replied, what up my boy, when we link it, with 4 gun emojis. Once April 2014 rolled around, their online back and forth and banters eventually turned violent. She posted, I guess you won't get the picture until one of y'all get put in the frame. Von clapped back, tweeting, is she with the ops on O Block? Now, it's unsure if Von talked about KI in this tweet, but it's more likely that he did. After that, KI said something really unnerving and ominous on Twitter. In the end, we died. And that would have been enough for her to live throughout the day. However, KI made a mistake that has probably been the reason for so many other in the gang scene. KI depressed their luck and dropped her location. She was within walking distance of O Block, her main ops, so this was bound to get ugly. You see, 3 hours after she dropped her location, KI, or Kyra Barnes, was fatally shot Friday around 3:30 p.m. in the 6400 block of South Eberhard Avenue in the city's Woodland neighborhood. According to eyewitnesses, KI was shot 9 times. Although she fought hard to survive, and a nearby resident even tried to help her by plugging the wounds up, it was too late. I went in, got a towel, and tried to plug up the hole to stop the bleeding, but it was coming from her and everything. And while tensions were at an all-time high, King Von immediately went on his patented demon time. After news broke out of KI's passing, Von took to social media and clowned KI with a callback tweet that made fun of her prior post, writing, I see y'all ain't get the picture until you get put in the frame. To make it worse, he also said, miss my old bitch. However, King Von was actually identified by some of the witnesses and was brought in as a suspect. But because they had no evidence to hold him there, the charges were dropped. What's even more baffling about this case was the fact that Von had a shaky alibi, stating that he was with his parole officer just a few minutes before KI was shot. But the authorities somehow accepted it as he walked away scot-free. Again, funny enough, Von even mocked the entire US legal system. Beating bodies ain't going to no prison. I'm pretty sure if they had one officer who constantly monitored King Von's Twitter and somehow put 2 and 2 together, they would have had him in no time. But just to show how much of a monster he was, he referenced KI's in Broke Ops when he rapped, put a pretty op bitch in a morgue, huh? Call that bitch drop dead gorgeous. Damn. If that's not an admission of guilt, I don't know what is. I mean, it is technically art. But this story gets even crazier. You see, 5 years after her death, a film crew set out to make a documentary about KI's life, and as you can expect, King Von found a way to insert himself into the situation and demonize KI and the GDs. He managed to appear in the documentary and troll the filmmakers and the crew.
Y'all was trying to us. I was like, damn.
And once the interviewer brought up the leaked text messages of Von trying to flirt with her, you could just see Von's devilish grin.
Does that sound about right?
That sound raw, so yeah, I'll be saying raw. Yeah, I probably did say that. I called I talked on the phone too.
And in one of the wildest turn of events, the doc played this exact sequence.
Before Jakira's death was being mocked online. But over in O Block, King Von felt differently.
When you tweeted once, you said you miss her.
Yeah. Cause we used to be talking on the phone. Like that's somebody like somebody you DM and talking to. And then one day they just gone.
I honestly don't know how King Von said this with a straight face. So he basically showed up to the interview about KI and pretended to be infatuated with her, when in reality, he was the one who took her out. Some fans were sickened by Von's actions, saying, the fact dude went on TV and talked about her knowing damn well he was is one of the sickest things I've ever seen in hip hop and rap music. But the good thing was that KI's family eventually managed to receive justice, although it came 7 years after KI's passing. In 2021, the police released a document that finally confirmed King Von was behind KI's passing. In the reports, they specifically name-dropped him, writing, the analysis of the investigation supports the findings that the victim was killed by the listed officer, Bennett David. But anyways, a month after KI's death, King Von seemed untouchable, and he probably felt it too. After all those bodies that he accumulated, he more or less felt bulletproof, even revealing his location on Twitter, saying, "Riding through the ops right now." In fact, on May 29th of 2014, King Von attended an afternoon birthday party, but this wasn't any ordinary party for Von. You see, he saw 2 of his ops in the area and took off. The mother of the birthday celebrant told Von, "Don't start no mess in my house," to which he replied with a smile saying, "I'm not on that." But unbeknownst to her, Von lied, because Von was in fact on that. See, Von left the party after the woman told him to leave, but not because he listened to her. No, Von just left so that he could get some backup. He then called someone who was at the party to take the children inside. He said, yeah, it was obvious that Von was about to wreak havoc on this party. But as Von was pulling up, the ops saw him and started running. From there, Von chased them while attempting to pick them off. Man, this guy was really a demon. And remember, despite telling the host that he wasn't on that. Amidst all the commotion and chaos, Von somehow hit an innocent bystander named Malcolm Stuckey, who was at the wrong place and at the wrong time. And when Von finally caught up with his ops, one broke his jaw and the other was hit in the foot. A few moments later, the 2 were speeding away in the Alero. But here's what made the case much sadder. You see, Stuckey wasn't even a gangbanger. He wasn't part of the GDs, nor did he rep any set. Yet he was the only casualty that day, since Von, his friend Wade, and the ops they chased all survived the encounter. At the end of the day, Von didn't take down any of his ops. Instead, he took out an innocent man by mistake. So, did Von show some remorse for the incident? Well, not really. However, he did tweet out, "Man, I got some issues I can't tell a soul." So make of that what you will. But anyways, Von's tyranny didn't end there, because even on prom night, King Von made sure to slide on his ops. According to his friend, he was the only one who carried a gun on the way to prom. Von wrote, "Somebody try me, I got on a suit, motherfucker still ain't that slow." So even though it was a night for a celebration, he had other plans. You see, King Von moved differently. Whether it was prom night, Thanksgiving, or whatever the occasion was, he was ready to gangbang. But this decision quickly backfired on him. After a botched Von was arrested after witnesses positively identified him as the suspect because of his white suit. So, King Von was apparently arrested on prom night for the This meant that the streets of Chicago were less violent for the time being. But that's not all. 2 months after Malcolm Stuckey's death, Wade, King Von's backup on that fateful night, was arrested and charged with murder. And that meant that Von was also going to catch a murder charge for it 2 days later. Anyways, while Von awaited trial, surely there was nothing he could do from behind bars to terrorize others, right? Well, think again. Even while in jail, King Von was still a menace. When he saw an op with a disrespectful tattoo, he slipped out of his handcuffs to give him a case of the beats. Luckily, the guards separated the two. If not, who knows what Von might have done to him. But that's not the end of Von's many fights inside the pen. Unfortunately, I can't show them because they're just far too violent for YouTube. But even with all these demonic moments, while you would expect that the trial against King Von was supposed to end badly for him, especially considering how stacked the odds were against him, Von really had luck on his side. Because despite Wade implicating himself and Von as suspects in the try and get a better sentence, miracles still happened for Von. See, after more or less snitching on King Von, Wade was probably afraid of the consequences. And so Wade went back on his word and didn't fall through on implicating Von in the crimes. And in the end, with that, the authorities had an obviously hard time pinning the case on Von. And Wade's change of heart wasn't their only issue. You see, all the eyewitnesses also failed to testify against King Von, presumably out of fear too. As a result, after 3 years in jail, King Von got off scot-free, despite everyone else in the world assuming he was responsible for Stuckey's murder. However, while in jail, despite getting busy throwing hands, burning facilities, and just being an overall menace to his fellow inmates, King Von apparently wasn't in demon time 24/7. Because aside from the violence he caused while being incarcerated, he was also trying to get into rap. In fact, speaking of Wade backpedaling on his statements, Von actually wrote a rap about the incident, referring to Wade's betrayal and the eyewitnesses disappearing in a song titled What's Next, where he rapped, "A guy told on me before, he got a longer sentence." Huh? What? He got a longer sentence? I think they gave him 28. He'd rather talk than listen. He'd rather talk than listen. He was the only one that told the other witness. Not only did he reference Michael Wade, aka Big Mike, he also claimed that the other witnesses were, and that Wade was the only one left. Now, after realizing that he was actually a good rapper with decent storytelling and a good cadence, Von started to get some traction as one of Chicago drill rap's upcoming stars. And this is where Lil Durk comes into the story. Because while Von was doing all these crimes, his childhood friend, Lil Durk, was busy making his mark in the rap scene. So when King Von got out of jail and was showing interest in becoming an actual rapper, Lil Durk was there to support Von and help him get his footing in the music industry. And well, King Von achieved just that. Because after he released his much awaited debut single, Crazy Story, in 2018, he immediately cemented himself as one of hip-hop's next best things. And with that, King Von and Lil Durk rode off into the sunset and left the streets for good. Or at least that's what he should have done. Because for someone like Von, he already had the street cred and was regarded as the realest gangster rapper, or at least one of them, in his generation. But his love for the streets of Chirac was everything to him. In short, King Von gangbanged for the love of the game, not even for survival. which is wild if you think about it. So once Durk signed him to his label OTF, King Von did crazy numbers. His songs peaked on the Billboard charts. Every song he released racked up millions of views, etc. But despite that, the thrill of the hunt was incomparable for Von. So in February of 2019, while Lil Durk and King Von were out in Atlanta, a fight broke out between them and some people, including a man named Alexander Witherspoon. Of course, King Von immediately went on demon time. However, Durk was also not someone to mess with, and the two allegedly fired 18 shots, with one hitting Witherspoon on the leg. Alexander also claimed that the $30,000 chain and his car were stolen by the two. And so, Durk and Von were charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault, gang activity, and possession of a firearm. The funny part was that at that point, Von was already making bank with his rap career. And after making hundreds of thousands from rap, Von was still down to get his hands dirty for a $30,000 chain. However, this backfired since the court set his bond at $300,000, to which Von gladly paid up for. Although Durk's charges were dropped after insufficient evidence, King Von would have been investigated and prosecuted for it, says the judge. But anyway, after his bond was paid, Von got back to releasing music, but his gangbanging was still on his mind 24/7. And well, the unfortunate victim of Von's 24/7 demon spree was also another of his ops, FBG Duck. But this time, Von wasn't the one getting his hands dirty. But before we move on to FBG Duck's murder, we have to first understand just how much King Von wanted Duck dead and why they hate each other. You see, Duck repped STL/EBT, which was a set of the Gangster Disciples, while you know that King Von's O Block were a part of the Black Disciples. In terms of rap, Duck had also had millions of streams on his songs and had major traction in Chicago, just like Von. And along the years, Duck and Von exchanged quite a lot of disses against each other in songs, with Duck famously dissing dead O Block members in his diss track titled Dead Bitch, where he rapped, "But fuck T-Roy and OD, them dead bitches." But behind the disses, both of them knew that it was only a matter of time until one of them died by the hand of the other, with FBG Duck even talking about it in his DJ Vlad interview.
You feel that people want to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
Does that go through your mind pretty much every day when you wake up?
Every day, all day. Every day, all day. It changed how I move.
Unfortunately for Duck, King Von got to him first, because in August of 2020, tragedy struck for Duck's friends and family when he received horrifying news.
Well, Rob, Chicago police tell me that these 3 victims were targeted, that 4 men in 2 different vehicles came down Oak Street, stopped right here in the middle, and started firing.
But it gets deeper. The thing was that while you would expect this incident to happen in the streets of Chirac, where all the incidents we've discussed in this segment have occurred, Duck didn't actually get taken out in a random Chicago block. Rather, he was fatally shot in a relatively rich and affluent neighborhood. And this of course begs the question, how did those guys get the courage to pop FBG Duck then and there in a gated community? Well, to answer your question, allegedly, King Von put out a $100,000 bounty for Duck's head. And the thing was that the authorities knew where to look after the goons snitched on themselves multiple times. So although it took roughly a year, the 6 suspects responsible were members of Von's O Block set.
Alleged members of Chicago's O Block gang have been convicted in the 2020 murder of a rapper known as FBG Duck. Duck's real name was Carlton Weekly. He was shopping on Oak Street in the Gold Coast.
However, if you're wondering why King Von wasn't mentioned by the reporter, well, it's because before the 6 of them were convicted, Von himself encountered an unfortunate fate. Because 3 months after FBG Duck was taken down by O Block, karma would eventually go around the block, and Von was the next target of karmic justice. When King Von's debut album, Welcome to the O Block, was released, it garnered positive reviews from music critics and peaked at number 5 on the US Billboard 200. So Von and his crew wanted to celebrate it, and celebrate they did, heading to a club in Atlanta. They were all smiles in the club, but little did they know, this would be the last time King Von would get to sing his lyrics. Now, this is where 2 other notable rappers came into the picture, namely NBA Youngboy and Quando Rondo. See, in the case of NBA Youngboy, King Von and NBA Youngboy's relationship had long soured at that point. Some say this was allegedly because Von never got the Youngboy feature that he always wanted, and that he was ignored by Youngboy after reaching out. So in response, Von got with Youngboy's ex. He even posted an image of them together, to which Youngboy replied with an Instagram caption where he wrote, "I'm gonna make sure my son, your daughter, since you trollin', 4KT. But Youngboy wasn't finished, as he released a snippet of a song featuring Asian Doll, who is Von's ex. This of course did not sit well with King Von. Von promised that if he saw Youngboy or any of his associates, it was on sight. But where does Quando Rondo fit into the equation? Well, before Von went at it with Youngboy, Quando was cool with Von. You could even see the 2 of them sharing a laugh here, with Von even calling Quando his boy. However, despite seeming to be really great friends with each other, the problem was that Quando was tighter with NBA Youngboy than he was with King Von, and both NBA Youngboy and Quando Rondo repped the same 4KT clique. So getting back to the story, after Von's nightclub stint, they were then headed back to their place, but somewhere along the way, King Von's Hellcat just randomly vanished.
At night, I don't know what it was, maybe it's God timing, I don't know what it was, but
Von completely went on his own course.
Luckily for them, they managed to catch up to Von, who was outside a hookah lounge. But from there, all hell broke loose. You see, King Von spotted Quando Rondo beside a car and walked up to him. Like I said, in his eyes, it was on site for everyone linked to NBA Youngboy. So he threw the first punch and started to give Quando the beats. However, there was a huge problem. You see that white car Quando stood beside? Well, the thing is, it was full of his goons. And in the chaos, someone fired a shot and hit King Von. The reports say that 2 police officers were working at that particular club or lounge and noticed the altercation and engaged some of the people involved. There was an exchange of gunfire with the police as well. The report reads that 2 people died and 1 person, rumored to be King Von, was brought to the hospital in critical condition. Unfortunately for him, he succumbed to his injuries and passed away in the hospital. At first, there were theories circulating online that King Von was actually shot by the authorities and that the Atlanta Police Department officers were the ones responsible for his death. But it was quickly proven that Timothy Leaks, also known as Lil Tim, was responsible for the shots that took Von out. So did he go to jail for taking out Von? Not quite, although he was arrested. Tim posted bond in April of the following year. Still, he was expected to face a trial for the murder. However, this took a shocking turn, because on August 20th of 2023, the rapper's attorney Noah Pines unexpectedly released a statement revealing that all of his charges had been dismissed. The case against Mr. Leaks was dismissed prior to ever being indicted, the statement said. How come the suspect was never tried in court for their apparent murder? Well, it's because Georgia has a stand your ground law. People may use deadly force when they reasonably believe it to be necessary to defend against certain violent crimes, right of self-defense. What Lil Tim did was technically condoned by the law. Everyone, including King Von, felt like he was untouchable, but in this case, that wasn't entirely true. After Von's passing, fans expressed sentiments like, King Von terrorized Chicago for so long, it's kinda crazy that someone from Georgia is the reason he's gone. And Von was a menace, he had to go. After his passing, fans and investigators dug deep and found out the true extent of Von's crimes. In fact, after posting an 8-hour documentary on him, Trapler Ross realized that by definition, King Von was a serial killer. Our next rapper on this list is also one of hip-hop's most dangerous individuals, but compared to Von, his crimes were a bit more disgusting, and we're talking about Viper. Nowadays, Viper is well known for being a meme rapper who managed to release 1 album a day, racking up a total of 1,500 plus albums. But there's a darker side to it. Behind the closed doors, he was an absolute menace in the streets, being a gangbanger, drug dealer, scammer, and an overall scumbag. So, after Viper gained notoriety for releasing more albums than any sane artist would ever do, his status as a meme rapper gave him a cult fanbase that either genuinely liked his music or were just in it for the humor. Unfortunately for them, Viper exploited their loyalty. You see, Viper was notorious for scamming his fans. His scam went like this. Viper would sell his fans merch like vinyls, shirts, autographed CDs, and many more. However, once they hit checkout on the order, it never came. If this was any other rapper, this would be a nightmare and he'd be labeled as a scammer. But to Viper's fans, it became something of an inside joke. Funny enough, most of his merch was always priced at $49 because according to Viper, $50 was just far too much. Although ordering Viper merch was a guaranteed way to throw your money away, there were instances when it actually arrived. One fan said, I bought a cassette off Yo Cowards back in 2017 off of Viper's Bandcamp and thought I got scammed because I didn't like it after a few weeks. Lo and behold, 4 months later, I got the cassette in a beat up package, broken container, and with a second insert from another album. So far so good, right? I mean, Viper personally assured him that he'd get the CD in time. And instead of a CD, Viper sent him an autographed box set of the National Treasure Saga. I mean, you can't be mad at that. I mean, at least it's not nothing. To make it worse, he also regularly scammed his fans who paid tickets to see him live by straight up not showing up. Again, if someone like Playboi Carti did this, he would be cancelled for scamming his audience. However, this only added to Viper's persona. But while scamming fans was on brand with how Viper was trying to highlight his persona, some of his crimes were just a whole nother level of disturbing. You see, a fan somehow got a hold of Viper's number and began to catfish him into thinking that he was an underage girl, which is honestly in line with the way Viper treats his fans in a way. However, Viper's response to these text messages were shocking. The messages started off when the catfish who pretended to be a girl wrote, Dear Viper, I'm your biggest fan. I just wanted to thank you for the inspiration you've given me. I've always wanted to see you live. If I ever do a concert, I will fly to it, XOXO, and a ton of heart emojis. Viper wasted no time and immediately asked what he considered to be the most important questions. Thanks, what grade you in? I mean, that alone is ridiculous. But Vipers continued, what town are you in? The troll replied and said, I am right now going to my last year of high school. I live in Kansas City, Missouri. Right now listening to French maids serving game, and it's fire. I am really enjoying it. So even after Viper read that she was only in high school, this did not raise any alarms as he kept pushing. Are you a girl? And if so, can you please send me a pic? And when he sent the images, Viper's tone only got weirder and weirder. OMG, you're adorable. Please tell me you don't have a boyfriend. She replied, I've never dated anyone. Nobody has never inspired me enough. You know how high school boys are. What the meme rapper said in response is absolutely wild. So you're a virgin? The two of them continue to exchange messages. I'd love to spend time with you too. And I'd make you very happy and very rich. In the meanwhile, let's make a pact to talk at least every other day and be boyfriend and girlfriend. But you can still go to prom, lol. so I don't lose you before it's time to set up your colleges. Deal? But then the troll wanted to take it a step further and pretended to be the girl's parents. Who the f is this? Why are you texting my daughter? She's only 17. If you don't stop texting her, you don't want to know what will happen. I am blocking you from her phone, and if I ever find out you are testing her again, you are done. So how did Viper react to a concerned parent protecting their underage daughter? Well, he said, 17 is legal, pops. For what it's worth, Viper probably should have just been canceled then and there. However, the text messages turned into an inside joke within his community. But it gets worse. You see, Viper hired someone to make a website for him, but that wasn't the only thing he wanted from the web developer. Apparently, this person had a young niece, which Viper sent texts like, if anyone asks you, tell them you're my girlfriend and you have a boyfriend. Me, Lee Carter, and I literally love you. Yikes. You'd think he learned his lesson from the catfish incident, but he instead doubled down and wrote, I see her from Illinois. Cool. Yes, your uncle is really cool. Yes, our underground scene is off the chain here. I own several companies also. I don't know if you knew, but I'm a real estate broker in addition to being a rap artist. Obviously, this was a lie, and this was just a clear attempt to fly her out to do God knows what. That's not all though. He also said, the big money is in real estate, and I'm going to get involved in it because I need a real estate agent in Illinois, so I'm going to pay for your Illinois real estate license program, and you will make $20,000 per house. Plus, I'm going to give you stock in my real estate companies worth $1 million. We will work out the details of all of this, which of course was a lie and some very weird love bombing, like, I don't know, oddly specific. Although Viper was many things in life, he was never a licensed real estate broker. And once the web developer caught wind of this, you can imagine how pissed he was.
It's my case. I've trusted you. Listen, I've trusted you with my niece, and you're trying to have sex with her.
But this wasn't the last of Viper's degenerate behavior, because he did something truly horrifying. On April 7th of 2023, the authorities were alerted and dispatched to Viper's home. And this story is as wild as you could expect.
This is a story making national headlines for its shocking allegations.
The incident was so shocking that it made national news. So what exactly was the incident that had caused authorities to raid Viper's home and got the attention of national media? Well, I'll just let this reporter tell you.
A man arrested accused of holding a pregnant woman against her will for years.
Allegedly, Viper had actually kidnapped a woman, not just any woman, but a pregnant woman. At first, once the cops arrived, they were surprised to discover that there was no victim at all.
And tonight, police have a new problem. They can't find the alleged victim of this man, Lee Carter.
While raiding the entire area, the authorities eventually heard the voice of a woman coming from one of the windows, and to their surprise, they discovered a woman who had been held against her will. Although she was horrified, she said that someone named Lee Carter, aka Viper, kept her hostage for, wait for it, 5 years.
We have also learned that the suspect is a well-known Houston rapper with a large social media following.
And it gets really disturbing. You see, she claimed that 5 years ago, she was pregnant and begged on the streets to make ends meet. Unfortunately for her, Viper pulled over his car and handed her $1. At first, the woman was thankful, but Viper's generosity didn't end there, because he offered to get her some help and asked the woman to get in his car. And as you can expect by now, this is where things go from sad to disturbing. Because after accepting Viper's offer, she claimed to be held hostage against her will for the past 5 years. And that's only scratching the surface in terms of how disturbing the story gets. Because according to her, Carter repeatedly forced her to take substances and prevented her from leaving the house by locking her inside a garage. Can you imagine being in that woman's shoes in that situation? She thought that she was being picked up by a good Samaritan, you know, guy just trying to save her life. But little did she know, Viper was in fact a monster. And because Viper didn't have a shower in the garage, he allowed her to take baths occasionally. Keep in mind that this was the only time she was allowed to leave the garage. Her fate was worse than prison, because while he held her captive, she never saw anyone else in the house but him. And when she tried to beg him to let her go, Viper would retaliate with violence. But not only that, he also forcibly gave her drugs to make sure she couldn't leave. And when she told him that she didn't want to take them anymore, he went on and forced her. Yeah, if it's not obvious at this point, Viper was really sick in the head. But in those 5 years she was held hostage, how come she never had a chance to escape? If you're wondering why she never ran to the door during one of her shower sessions, well, it's hard to do that when your diet only consists of chips and snacks for food, and she was hardly able to get a full meal. When she spoke to police, the woman said that she had not showered in almost 2 months. But sadly, this situation gets more sad and tragic when you hear the following details. You see, at one point, she was able to escape once, and here's what happened. She ended up in the hospital, and Carter came and picked her up and locked her in the garage again. You can't help but feel sorry for what she went through. But after her failed attempt, Viper did this. He then put boards on the exterior of the garage window to prevent her from escaping again. To make it worse, her living conditions weren't any better. He had a makeshift toilet inside of the garage that did not flush, a sink with a faucet and dripping spigot, a mattress covered with vomit, assorted chips, and a few Twinkies. To back her claims up, the documents read that the authorities found her extremely malnourished and only weighing approximately 70 pounds with a pungent stench. But it gets crazier. Here's what one of Viper's neighbors said about the situation. He just kind of explained that he had some girls that were in there and he never used the word locked up, but he was kind of protecting them from themselves. Yeah, protecting them from what exactly? Freedom? The neighbor added, from the sounds of things, she would call him his boyfriend, her boyfriend. So I mean, it was kind of like a mutual weirdness, I guess. In case you forgot, this went on for 5 years. So how did she escape? Well, according to the documents, she allegedly got a hold of Viper's laptop, and from there, she used an application that allowed her to text 911.
Houston police confirm receiving 8 calls for service to the house in the past year. In April, the woman messaged police for help through his laptop. When they arrived,
and with that, the cops immediately went to work to save this poor woman. But while all this was happening, the question is, where exactly was Viper during all of this? Well, according to reports, Viper was hiding in a motel in an effort to escape captivity. Fortunately, a couple days later, the Houston Police Department eventually found Viper and arrested him.
the man who owns the house, 52-year-old Lee Carter, was arrested at a nearby motel yesterday.
He was thrown in Harris County Jail and charged with aggravated kidnapping. And this case was nothing but stomach churning. It was so bad that while in court, the judge had to let everyone in the room out before he started to read Viper's charges. That's how you know the charges were heinous.
The accusations against him are so concerning. A judge cleared the room today before reading aloud court documents and setting his bond at $100,000.
And because of how horrifying and sickening Viper's actions were, the Houston Police Department made it clear that justice would be served.
It makes me sick as a human being, and I can tell you as a police department, we are here for the citizens of Houston.
Funny enough, a fan commented, "You know you're going to prison when the judge has to clear the room just to read the charges." But of course, Viper wasn't just about to accept his fate, and the rapper immediately claimed that these were nothing more than allegations and that he had evidence to disprove them.
Yeah, but the man facing those allegations denies those claims. It's a story with a lot of questions still left unanswered.
Of course, Viper claimed he was innocent when he spoke to a news outlet.
Carter spoke briefly for KHOU to claim his innocence.
And in a statement to the media, Viper announced something that would more or less tell a vastly different side of the story, when he said,
"This is my son's mother, so this is not a stranger. But I'm innocent. I've only lived in the house and owned it for 13 months.
In Viper's defense, the lawyer claimed that there was no kidnapping going on. He said that he and the woman were in a relationship and that she was complicit in everything that happened so far.
They've been together for years in a mutually consensual relationship, which is 100% legal. In fact, the complainant and my client have a 3-year-old son together, for whom I've already been provided the birth certificate.
To make it more confusing, the woman said that she had her fair share of mental issues.
He did not kidnap anyone. The complaining witness has had some mental history issues.
Keep in mind that all major news outlets and stations attacked Viper at this point, and rightfully so. And so, knowing how bad his reputation and public image had been tarnished, Viper had to clap back at his haters. And the first thing he did was hop on Twitter and upload this post, saying, "All news channels will apologize to me publicly, and those news channels that refuse to apologize to me publicly will be sued for $5 million for slander and defamation of character." But that still begs the question, if she was pregnant, what exactly happened to the baby? Unfortunately, that question is still left unanswered to this day. However, the documents revealed that Viper hired a landscaper to try and mask the noise coming from the garage. It was only after Viper was arrested that the landscaper finally pieced it together.
That's what I'm going back and rewinding everything. I'm like, that's why it was so bad. That's why I was feeling like that.
He also said,
because I feel like he used me just to keep him, out the limelight, because if I keep cleaning up the property.
It's a shame, really. After he managed to carve out a niche audience and unironically pioneered a subgenre of rap, Viper played into his persona a bit too much, blurring the lines between satire and committing outright crime. Our next figure is Daryl Homo Baum, who grew up in a tough Brooklyn environment in the 1960s and was known for being Mike Tyson's childhood friend. Although he's not technically a rapper, he's still rap adjacent and is a big part of hip-hop history, as we'll see later. And his nickname Homo actually stood for homicide. And as you can imagine, he didn't get that nickname through peaceful methods. You see, in the 1970s, Homo was allegedly involved in a lot of violent crimes throughout the streets of New York. But that's not all. He probably learned a thing or two from Iron Mike because he also gained notoriety for being able to knock people out with one punch before robbing them. But robbing wasn't the only crime Homo indulged in. Homo was said to have worked as a hitman in the 1990s, although the details were pretty scarce. And he served time in jail before being released on December 31st of 1999 on New Year's Eve. After he got out, he met up with Mike Tyson, who was still active in the boxing scene. Not only that, Mike was committed to keeping his friend out of trouble. So Mike gave Homo a car, some cash, a watch, and a job as his bodyguard. So what did Homo do? Well, he didn't exactly like to have things handed down to him, it just didn't sit right with him. So he went down a dark path of crime once again. Around this time, 50 Cent was starting to blow up after releasing How to Rob in 1999. If you're wondering why I mentioned 50 Cent, well, he's probably the most important part of the segment. See, at 34 years old, Hamo encountered a lot of younger guys on the streets of Brooklyn who were eager to come up in this world. So Hamo, being an established part of Brooklyn streets, he knew that he had to make an impression. So Hamo pressured dealers and forced them to sell their products to him. At the same time, he joined the Peter crew together with Ivory Peanut Davis and James J.R. Hamilton. And for someone who already had connections with the criminal world and hip-hop, it wasn't hard for Hamo to find like-minded people to link up with. And it was around this time that he got involved with Kennick McGriff, also known as Supreme. Now, the Supreme fellow was a big deal not just in hip-hop, but also in gang culture, since Supreme was allegedly a notorious drug dealer and the leader of a criminal enterprise aptly named the Supreme Team. And this is where 50 comes into play. In the early 2000s, hip-hop was at an all-time high. Virtually all of today's rap legends were at their peaks during that period. Hip-hop was super competitive at this point, and of course rappers started feuding with each other to fight for supremacy, no pun intended. One of the biggest rap beefs at the time was 50 Cent and Ja Rule. However, in the beef, Supreme favored Ja Rule more and backed him up over 50 Cent. After all, in Preem's eyes, there was no reason for the syndicate to back 50 Cent, considering that Ja Rule was a hip-hop star while 50 was still unproven. Yeah, it was a really crazy time in hip-hop. But the feud wouldn't just be about verbal attacks and diss tracks. It actually got physical. In fact, it culminated in several incidents of people taking other people's possessions, aka robbing them. For one, Ja Rule's chains got snatched by a member of 50's crew. Of course, Ja Rule had to do something as well. And what did Ja Rule do? Well, he ran to Supreme and told him all about 50 trying to sabotage him. But despite Supreme's involvement in the beef, it was still far from the end, as 50 somehow upped the score again and took Ja's watch. But it gets worse. I mean, 50 Cent just kept on embarrassing him, because there was even an instance where Ja Rule was recording a music video and 50 pulled up on him with a pistol. So Supreme kept telling 50 to leave Ja alone, but 50 didn't listen. And here's what Tony Yayo said about an encounter 50 had with Preem.
I remember Preem coming to the block one day and try to like sun 50 and rub his head.
You know what 50 did? Yeah, man. Do it back, yeah. Man.
That was the day I know Preem didn't like 50.
To make the situation worse, 50 Cent hung around individuals that had beef with Supreme and released Ghetto Quran, a track that directly mentioned Supreme, although it wasn't necessarily a diss when 50 rapped. See, they feared Prince and respected Preem, and see, Preem was the businessman and Prince was the... Which doesn't really sound like a diss to me. If anything, it's more of a tribute. I mean, what do you guys think? Anyways, Supreme didn't take the track well at all, and escalated this into another beef. This time, it was Supreme versus 50 Cent, and this feud got ugly fast. You see, Supreme had already allegedly escaped a hit placed on him at a gas station, and because of 50 Cent's song, Supreme thought that he was behind the hit. And with Supreme and 50's rocky relationship beforehand, this only made it worse. In response, Supreme allegedly placed the hit on 50 Cent to get back at the rapper. So how does Hamo fit into all of this? Well, on May 24th of 2000, not even 6 months after he got out, Supreme allegedly ordered Hamo to take 50 Cent down, because in Preem's eyes, he was only taking the people out who wanted to get rid of him first. So while 50 Cent was outside his grandmother's home in Queens, a car pulled up and shot the rapper 9 times, hitting almost every body part imaginable. 50's friend, who was also named Curtis, got hit in the hand. Despite that, Curtis was still able to drive and took 50 Cent to the hospital, where the rapper was pronounced to be in critical condition. Although Hamo unloaded his clips at 50, it still wasn't enough to bring him down. Interestingly enough, some reports have stated that if Hamo adjusted his aim and got 50 a few inches above where he originally got hit, he would have rewritten hip-hop history. But ultimately, he didn't. And this failure would come back to haunt Hamo later on. Roughly 3 weeks after 50 Cent was shot 9 times, things would go from horrible to outright tragic. See, 50 Cent, despite allegedly never joining a gang, was still a well-respected figure in the streets. 50 himself was also known to never back down from anyone. This of course meant that if someone failed to end him, things were gonna get real ugly for that person. And that, unfortunately, was Hamo. And so, 3 weeks after 50's shooting, people retaliated against the perpetrator. Sadly, Hamo was shot in the head. And immediately, Hamo's life was ended in the streets of Brooklyn, where he operated and grew up. In hindsight, Hamo should have known that 50 wasn't going to stop coming after him, despite being in a hospital bed. But unfortunately for Hamo, things just didn't go his way. However, 50 Cent didn't stop there. You see, one of Hamo's friends and fellow Peanut Gang affiliate, Peanut Davis, was also an unfortunate victim of 50's revenge tour. Sadly, Peanut got shot twice at a New York club. And what's worse is he was not the only casualty. See, J.R. Hamilton, another member of the Peanut Gang, was also shot, this time inside a seafood restaurant. And if you know the old proverb about vengeance, that you're supposed to dig 2 graves, the gangs involved really took that to heart, because when Hamo's older brother got released from prison, he vowed to avenge his brother's death. However, this revenge plot failed as Tyrone Baum got ambushed and killed instead. So how did Mike Tyson react to his childhood friend's passing? Well, once Iron Mike heard that Hamo died, many fans speculated that the fight he was about to have would be postponed. But after Mike won in 38 seconds, he shouted out Hamo in his speech, saying, "I bear witness, there's only one God in Muhammad, blessings and peace upon him. I dedicate this fight to my brother Daryl Baum, who died. I'll be there to see you. I love you with all my heart. All praise be to my children. I love you. It's easy to say that Hamo should have just turned his back to the streets, considering that Mike Tyson was there willing to give him a better way of earning money. But maybe the streets of Brooklyn had a stronger pull on him. Sadly, in the end, Hamo's association with gang culture not only cost his life, but his friends and brothers' lives as well. Of course, 50 being 50, this incident would be referenced in 50 Cent's iconic Get Rich or Die Trying album. When the album released in 2003, there were a couple of references to 50's incident, but none of them were more blatant than the third verse on Many Men, where 50 rapped, "In the Bible, it says what goes around comes around, Hamo shot me, 3 weeks later he got shot down. Now it's clear that I'm here for a real reason, because he got hit like I got hit, but he ain't fucking breathing." Anyways, at the end of the day, Hamo died for nothing, while 50 Cent's career as a hip-hop legend was solidified after he dropped the iconic album that referenced the failed hit. In an interview, Oprah asked 50 for more details about the person who shot him.
Ever find out who did it?
Yeah, I knew who did it shortly after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they are now where?
Oh, the guy who actually shot me is dead. And the guy who paid him got life in jail.
As for Supreme, he's currently fighting his own battles with the legal system. In 2007, Supreme was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility for parole for his February 1st, 2007 conviction for racketeering, 2 murder for hire homicides, narcotics trafficking, and engaging in illegal financial transactions with drug money. So not only did 50 have his revenge at Hamo, he also got the last laugh because the person who ordered the hit is currently serving a life sentence. Our next rapper turned dangerous criminal is Mad Max. In his case, Mad Max blew up in the deadly streets of Chicago. If you know something about Chicago streets, you know that the tough environment meant that people like Max were unfortunately more or less fated to get themselves involved with gang and criminal activities at a young age. And what truly led Max to pursue such a dangerous lifestyle was that most of his family were part of a gang, namely the NLMB, which was a combination of Black P Stone and GD members. So it was only natural for Max to be in a gang as well. Not to mention that he was close friends with other notable members in the NLMB like G Herbo. And at a very young age, Mad Max was already regarded as NLMB's secret weapon. But before that, we have to first understand why Max and Herbo's NLMB were beefing with rival gangs. You see, in 2009, the NLMB and Black Mob initially got along with each other. However, this all changed with a No Limit member named Vito operated in Black Mob's territory without asking for permission or paying taxes. This of course did not sit well with the Black Mob, and they of course had to do something. And what they did was just foul, because apparently Black Mob members got a hold of Vito and violated him. NLMB obviously did not take the violation of Vito lightly, and the leaders wanted to get a paycheck for what the Black Mob did to Vito. The fact was that in the eyes of these gangs, the Black Mob didn't just violate Vito, but they also disrespected NLMB's name, and revenge came in the form of an all-out gang war. See, when Vito got violated, he wanted his retaliation to matter, and what Vito did basically caused life-changing consequences for generations. See, Vito shot a Black Mob member, but he didn't just shoot him. He did in front of his family, which if you didn't know was a huge violation of the code. And this exact incident escalated the situation to extreme and horrible proportions, because it was a catalyst for the bloody gang war with Mad Max at the center of it all. A year after Vito kicked the gang war off, Mad Max was arrested for allegedly shooting at his ops. However, the details for the incident were obscured because Max wasn't 18 when the crime took place. At that point in time, casualties were dropping left and right. A lot of NLMB members fell at the hands of rival gang members. However, what really made the war personal for Mad Max was when his uncle, Carlos Alexander, aka Big Los, was murdered near his home. And Big Los passing by the hands of the Black Mob fueled Max's determination for vengeance even more. And this was the start of Mad Max's revenge spree against his NLMB ops. Over the years, he slowly turned into one of the most feared people in NLMB. But as beloved as he was within No Limit, Max was equally feared by other rival gangs. From then on, having lost many of his brothers as well as his real uncle due to the gang war, Mad Max showed zero fear and started to hunt down his ops, specifically the ones responsible for several NLMB members' deaths. And it started on November 10th, 2012. That fateful day, Max went to hunt a Lakeside gang member named Anthony Bagney, aka Bud. Max caught Bud lacking. Allegedly, Max gunned down Bud on East 79th Street. Sadly for Bud, he was rushed to the hospital, but succumbed to his injuries later that day. Now, this was obviously personal. So why did Max target Anthony? Well, it's because he was allegedly present when his uncle was killed. But Max's spree of violence didn't stop there, because in June of 2013, while D'Angelo Simmons, aka Lolo, was taking a stroll down the street, he didn't expect his ops to catch him lacking that day, as 2 suspects, one being Mad Max, approached him and emptied their clips on Lolo. Like Bud, Lolo was rushed to a hospital, and although he survived a gunshot to his chest at first, he tragically died on the same day. And Max never being caught for his crimes became a recurring pattern with many of Max's victims down the line. In the same year, tensions between No Limit and Lakeside were at an all-time high. With Bud and Lolo's deaths, Lakeside gang members knew they had no choice but to retaliate, and that's exactly what they did when they killed Simo and Tracy, 2 NLMB members. After that incident, more blood would be shed. That same month, Mad Max and other NLMB members ambushed a Black Mob member named Jordan Jefferson and mercilessly in the head. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The fact was that Jefferson was the 3rd victim of Mad Max's rampage in 2013 alone. And with so many bodies, it seemed like the gang war would never end. Things only got worse for everyone involved, because on August 10th of 2013, another No Limit member died at the hands of their ops. This time, another rapper would be involved in the war. You see, Jacoby Heron, aka Kobe, another NLMB member, was outside McDonald's in Oglesby Avenue. And Kobe wasn't just any other NLMB member. You see, he was G Herbo's close friend. The rapper even titled a mixtape after him. And as you can imagine, No Limit was all in on finding the culprits responsible for Kobe's death, who they later identified as KTS Vaughn and Pasto. But before NLMB got to them, Mad Max had other plans. You see, 3 days after Kobe's death, Max set his eyes on Eric Chisholm, an inactive Black Mob member who recently became a father. Despite that, in Max's eyes, he was still an op. Allegedly, Mad Max fired at Eric after he pulled up on him in an SUV on South Colfax Avenue. Again, there were no arrests made, but rumors stated that Eric's death was a part of Max's quest for vengeance against the rival gangs of KTS, Lakeside, and Black Mob. This marked his 4th alleged victim in 2013 alone. Of course, No Limit was going to do everything to continue the cycle of violence and death. 3 months after Kobe's death, No Limit wanted to make sure that the ones responsible paid for it, namely KTS Vaughn and Pasto. Unfortunately, NLMB members actually found Pasto near his house, and when they got to him, they showed Pasto zero mercy, same way they thought Pasto and KTS Vaughn had done to Kobe. And even though Pasto was taken to the hospital, it was far too late as he was announced dead that night. To make it worse, after his passing, NLMB clowned on him both with songs and social media. Of course, Max was rumored to be involved in the murder. In the next few years following Pasto's death, Mad Max faced his own fair share of legal issues, and even faced multiple arrests due to reckless conduct, not wearing a seatbelt, and driving without a valid license. But it wasn't all bad for Max. You see, because of that, his involvement within NLMB's gang activity was significantly reduced. But as soon as those legal issues were resolved, Max was back out in the streets. It was like Max never left, and the hunt for Kobe's killers went underway again. Eventually, their hunt had reached its conclusion. On June 23rd of 2015, while NLMB members were cruising in an SUV trying to find new victims, they found KTS Vaughn walking alone. After NLMB saw this, they allegedly pulled up on KTS Vaughn and started firing shots at him, hitting KTS Vaughn in the head and body. Interestingly enough, according to some reports, KTS Vaughn was allegedly under Xanax at the time. Was Max involved in the hit? KTS Vaughn often called himself Big Cutthroat the Smoker, and once he met his end, Max renamed his Instagram to Smoker, which was an obvious slight at the person he just killed. So after NLMB got their revenge on Kobe's killer, you would think that they finally had enough and stopped the violent gang war, right? Not exactly, because in 2017, 2 years after KTS Vaughn's death, NLMB would take down one of Black Mob's most prominent members, a rapper named Shoota Shells. But before we get into that, you have to know how big of a deal Shoota Shells was for the Black Mob. You see, in 2014, Shoota Shells released a diss track with a music video titled Death of 150, which took aim at dead NLMB members like Kobe. But that's not all. Shoota wasn't only known for his lyricism, like his name, he was also a notorious shooter that took down a lot of No Limit members in a short life. Now, cut to Shoota's shooting incident. While walking back to his car, Shoota Shells was ambushed by 3 individuals. When they were done, he was unrecognizable. No Limit's hate for Shoota ran deep. As revenge for Shoota's disrespectful track, as well as to send a message to the Black Mob, NLMB really took it to Shoota to point out that the authorities found 43 shell casings. However, that's not all, because apparently 2 months before Shoota's death, the FBI launched an investigation into the gang war between the Black Mob and No Limit. And one of the most important conclusions to the report was Mad Max's involvement as a primary suspect in many of the casualties. But Max would never be brought to justice. On August 3rd, 2018, while Max was in the process of moving to a building on South Kingston Avenue, the worst possible person to see Max recognized him. It was a Lakeside gang member named Terrell Webb who knew how much Mad Max terrorized Lakeside. With that knowledge, the Lakeside member tried to jump Max, and in an attempt to escape, Max ran to the building. Unfortunately for Max, it was all too late. Terrell Webb eventually caught up to Max, and with bad intentions, catching Max lacking the same way he had caught so many others. After that, Max was immediately taken to the hospital. Although he was in critical condition, it looked like he was going to make it out alive. Thanks to the efforts of the medical staff, they managed to keep Max alive for a month. However, although it seemed like Max was going to pull through, he eventually succumbed to his injuries on September 3rd of 2018. That could have been the end of Mad Max's story, but here's where it gets deeper. Remember the Lakeside gang member who fired 2 shots at Max? Well, he somehow ended up behind bars after Max's death.
But Chicago police have filed their first murder charge stemming from the deadliest weekend Chicago has seen this year. 27-year-old Terrell Webb is accused of shooting and killing a rival gang member. He was charged after a deathbed statement from the victim. It was one of more than a dozen murders the first weekend in August.
And this is where rumors began to circulate that Mad Max snitched on his deathbed bed when the authorities visited him. But it gets crazier because there's video footage of him allegedly snitching.
And do you understand who I am and what I do? And did I then ask you if you would agree to speak to me regarding the aggravated battery when you were shot? Did you agree to have a conversation with me? And in summary, when we spoke earlier, did you tell me that you were moving into your mother's house?
Although Max's words were slurred, probably because of the hospital drugs he was under, it's hard to fight the snitching allegations when he did this.
And did you also say that as you were moving into your mother's house, you saw a subject or a person that you knew to be Terrell? That Terrell kicked open the gate at your mother's apartment building and then proceeded to shoot you with a fire. I'm sorry, is that a yes?
And for someone with a reputation for being No Limit's ruthless killer, you can imagine that this tarnished his street cred. After all, with the amount of crimes Max was involved in, it was hard to believe that he would willingly give up his brothers, the same ones he fought and for. In the eyes of many, all the bodies that he caught for NLMB ultimately meant nothing because he committed the ultimate sin in gang culture. But despite that, NLMB members still regularly show love for Max. 5 years later, No Limit Cairo sat down with Adam on the No Jumper podcast and said this about his comrade.
I'm gonna just say this shit, I'm gonna just say, bro, wrong, cause he know what we signed up for, getting in the street shit.
So at the end of the day, Mad Max died as he lived, captivated by the violence of Chicago's brutal gang wars. But he was just one of many who ultimately lost their lives to the streets and gang lifestyle. Now this next criminal, who is someone who despite never becoming a rapper, is still probably one of the most referenced individuals in hip hop history due to how influential he was in the underground crime scene, namely Big Meech. Before Big Meech became one of the most popular and influential figures in both the US crime scene and hip hop culture, we need to look at how he built his empire from the ground up. Demetrius Flannery, aka Big Meech, was born into poverty. So to make ends meet, Meech had to hustle as early as high school by selling funny grass just to keep the lights on. But he finally got his big break in 1984, when Meech and his brother Terry managed to get in touch with a drug dealer named E.D. Boyd. You see, Boyd wasn't your run-of-the-mill dealer. In fact, Boyd was actually one of the biggest dealers in Detroit at the time, running a Detroit-based gang called 50 Boys. It didn't take long before Meech started moving drugs for Boyd. And this is when Meech started to see dollar signs as he made a ton of money working for the 50 Boys. However, if there's one thing you should know about trafficking substances, it's that your rival dealers will always see you as a threat. Obviously, that's what happened in Meech's case, as he started to beef with another dealer named Layden. The beef got so bad that Meech almost got killed in a drive-by shooting. After that near-death experience, you'd think that Meech would have done something terrible. And well, that's not exactly how it went down. While tensions were at an all-time high, Big Meech threw a party in front of Layden's grandmother's house. This was obviously not a very good idea, and it culminated in a shooting that he narrowly survived again. Despite the threats to his life, instead of stopping, Meech started growing his business even more. And once he found a supplier to bring coke into the city, that's when Meech's empire started to rise. But there was one problem. You see, E.D. Boyd was still in the picture, and it'd be a bad look for Boyd if one of his own dealers got bigger than him. Luckily for Meech, Boyd retired from the drug game while he was ahead, leaving Big Meech in charge of everything. In a DJ Vlad interview, E.D. Boyd said,
"The fucking feds, I know them alphabet motherfuckers was looking at me. I had other options, okay? And one of my options, I said, but look, fuck this."
So when the feds had their eyes on Boyd, what did he do?
You know, I done wore the finest tailor-made suits. I've been across the world. I done ate at the finest restaurants, okay? It's somebody else's turn.
So of course, with Boyd gone, Meech seized the opportunity, and under his leadership, one of the biggest underground crime organizations in the US was born. With Meech at the helm, and to officially retire Boyd, the 50 Boys were rebranded into the iconic Black Mafia family. The Black Mafia family, or BMF, was unlike any other gang at the time. Big Meech made sure to keep everyone in line and kept their pockets full. In his iconic interview, he said,
"Everything starts with the leader. I'm a good leader, so I got good people that follow. You know what I'm saying? It's simple."
But how did their crew operate so smoothly, knowing how much money was involved in their operations? Well, according to Big Meech, it was simple.
We pay. You know, that's simple. A lot of niggas don't like to spend their money. We love to spend our money. We can't take none of this shit with us.
True enough, there would never be another organized crime group that carried itself the way the BMF did.
There ain't no other crew like this in the world, and there never will be another one. Not black. It never will be, because they said that if niggas like this is shining all together, being together, doing shit every day, then they gonna fall out over some money, or somebody gonna rob, steal, and kill. I have yet to see that. All of us get along.
But Meech's name wasn't only a big deal in the industry, he was also an influential figure within hip-hop. In 1990, Meech wanted to expand his empire's reach. Fortunately, his younger brother Terry also had his hand in the family business. So he moved to Atlanta while Terry stayed in Detroit to handle his operations there. And the blessings just kept coming Meech's way, as they managed to form a business relationship with the Mexican drug cartel. This partnership helped BMF secure a steady supply of drugs. And within a few years, the Black Mafia family began to distribute substances to various states, like Alabama, Florida, Missouri, and more. To say the BMF was an empire was an understatement. It was more of a substance kingdom, operated by the charismatic Big Meech. At one point, the BMF even had over 500 people in the crew. Over the years, with Meech and Terry both handling business as well as they did, the Black Mafia family had become one of the most powerful trafficking organizations in all of the USA. You see, Meech made sure to be as calculating as possible, literally. This reached a point that Meech hired a math and economics expert, Doc Marshall, to handle their money and to make sure that their operations ran as smoothly as possible. Now, Big Meech was of course not a rapper, yet many in the rap community still deemed him as hip-hop's biggest kingpin. So how did this happen? Well, unlike other crime organizations, Meech was smart. He knew that BMF needed a way to launder their dirty money. So in 2001, Meech formed BMF Entertainment, a music label that was used as a front to launder their dirty money. From there on, BMF Entertainment also worked alongside artists such as Jeezy, Fabulous, Jay-Z, Lil Scrappy, and others. They also signed West Coast act Blue Da Vinci. Unfortunately for Meech, not every investment he made became successful. Da Vinci's career never took off despite Big Meech's financial backing. Regardless of that, the BMF name became a household name in the US thanks to Meech's lavish lifestyle. BMF became famous for throwing lavish parties and making extravagant spectacles in strip clubs throughout A-Town. Big Meech once even put on a safari-themed birthday party and brought live tigers to the event. Funnily enough, not even Jay-Z in his prime was able to one-up Big Meech. You see, while Jeezy was shooting a music video in New York, Jay-Z was there with him since Jeezy was signed to Def Jam. On the way there, Jay drove to the shoot in his luxurious blue Maybach. And a couple of minutes later, Big Meech pulled up and parked two black Maybachs on both sides of Jay-Z's car. Keep in mind, they didn't have beef at that point. It was just a way for Meech to flex on him. He showed Jay that a street kingpin like himself had pockets way deeper than he could ever imagine. And obviously, BMF's influence on rap was just something else, to the point that even someone like 50 Cent could not help but address how powerful the gang was. In an interview with DJ Drama on Sirius XM, 50 Cent said, "They were so embedded into the music business, because when you can't find your pockets, people like you around, when you're at the nightclub and Puffy can't buy champagne because you bought it all, they start to have to speak to you." Although other players in the rap game wanted to get on Big Meech's good side, 50 knew that he had to steer clear, and that was smart. I stayed away from it because I know who I am, and I know how easy it is for me to, I might have bought something, I might have gotten too involved or too into it, or it would have been easy enough for people to make me involved without me being involved. I was doing too well. Basically, he didn't want to go down with them. And the BMF tried to reach out to 50, but he knew better to associate with them. They would reach out to me and I would avoid it because it just wasn't good for where I was at. However, unlike 50, Jeezy openly showed support to Meech's BMF because he felt it boosted Jeezy's career. The author of BMF, Rise and Fall of Big Meech, had this to say: "What he did in Atlanta was promote a lot of parties for Jeezy and help to get his music spread around to all the strip clubs, which is how rappers would make it or break it." But that's not all Meech did for hip hop, since he also supplied fancy cars and crazy medallion pendants for video shoots. And Jeezy was really open about his very tight relationship with Big Meech. Despite not being signed to BMF Entertainment, Jeezy showed them a lot of love. You know, Jeezy shows up in all these promotional videos in which he's shouting out the Black Mafia family and Meech. So with that, it's safe to assume that Meech probably felt like he was on top of the world. And can you blame him? BMF was making hundreds of millions of dollars off substances alone. They were one of the most respected, feared, and beloved groups in hip hop. However, there's this saying that unfortunately applies to Big Meech, and it's that the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And sadly, that's exactly what happened to the BMF. You see, due to all the money he was flaunting, Big Meech attracted all kinds of people, ranging from individuals who wanted to work with the BMF and other artists who wanted Meech's help. However, this fame also landed Meech and Terry and the entire BMF under the radar of the US legal system, and this was the start of BMF's downfall. Seeing that BMF was in the drug game, the Drug Enforcement Association, or DEA, started to look into Meech, Terry, and everyone close to them. Remember when I told you how everyone wanted to get to the BMF? Well, not everyone had good intentions, and on September of 2003, 3 men tried to break into the BMF mansion in Atlanta, thinking it was an easy score. However, the cops were somehow alerted. This, of course, was the worst possible scenario for BMF. After all, who knew what kind of products they had stashed in the house? With such a dangerous type of operation, you could only assume there to be some money, weapons, and even illegal substances. So, with the threat of their whole operations getting busted then and there, here's what BMF did. Those in the mansion quickly fled the scene, carrying the illegal supplies and products with them on the road before the cops came. However, to make things less suspicious, they needed to have someone stay behind to talk to the cops. They chose Doc Marshall, not only because he was their math and economics guy, but because he wasn't exactly a street dude. But there was a problem with this. See, the cops somehow had a warrant to search the mansion. And well, this was enough to open the floodgates, because due to the warrant, cops had permission to enter the mansion. When they entered the mansion and basically flipped the place upside down, the police found large quantities of substances, prompting the authorities to put the unassuming Marshall behind bars. So how did Big Meech and Terry react? Well, instead of panicking like most criminals do, they showed that they weren't really worried by Marshall's arrest in the slightest. The only thing that changed for the BMF was that they rarely did house parties anymore, instead opting out to go to clubs. This would help them prevent another mansion raid like what happened in Atlanta. But this brings us to November 12, 2004. You see, while Big Meech and his BMF crew were partying in Club Chaos, he struck up a conversation with a woman. But what he didn't realize at the time was that this conversation would lead to an argument with the woman's boyfriend, Anthony Jones, aka Wolf. Now, this is where things started to get tricky, because Wolf wasn't just some random guy at the club. Wolf actually had some former associations with some of hip-hop's figureheads. You see, apparently, at one point, Wolf was Diddy's bodyguard, confidant, and advisor, and trusted right-hand man. And of course, Wolf would not let the disrespect go unpunished. So once Meech and his crew came outside, Wolf came back and started a scuffle. However, this argument immediately turned sour and it escalated into a shootout. Sadly, the shootout proved to be a fatal decision for everyone involved, as it led to Wolf and his friend's death. Although Meech was shot in the, it wasn't anything life-threatening. The authorities actually brought Meech to jail, but he was released the day after due to a lack of evidence. So far so good, right? Well, not really. In fact, this incident would probably be one of the biggest contributors to the eventual demise of Meech, Terry, and the entire BMF operations. See, even though the cops didn't know who Big Meech was, which was crazy knowing how massive BMF was at the time, they knew they had something on the guy who they caught. You see, the DEA requested the IRS to take a look at Meech's taxes, and they found out that his numbers didn't exactly match with his lifestyle. So they asked permission to wiretap the crew. And so, the authorities got to work and managed to wiretap Terry's phone. However, the feds never really captured anything incriminating in Terry's calls and messages because he only talked in BMF code. However, while trying to be as discreet as he could, Terry managed to anger the authorities even more. Allegedly, the feds picked up a conversation Terry had with someone, and they heard Terry talking smack. Ironically, they picked up Terry saying that the feds weren't smart enough to wiretap phones. And this of course lit a fire in the detectives. After they somehow traced the next substance delivery through the wiretaps, they managed to capture the courier, a man named Jeffrey Lair. While in prison, Jeffrey made a crucial mistake. He dialed Terry's phone and told him what happened. The authorities could have incriminated Terry for this, but they also remained patient and wanted to use this opportunity not to just put Terry behind bars, but also the entirety of BMF. But while the walls were slowly closing in on BMF, it's interesting to know what Big Meech, the head of the operation, was doing. Well, for someone as smart and calculated as Big Meech, he did nothing. Apparently, Big Meech was unfazed. He continued to splurge on expensive cars, houses, and even threw a ton of parties for rappers. Meech felt untouchable, but little did he know BMF's downfall was closer than he thought. Because on October of 2005, the US authorities launched a full-scale raid on 9 BMF mansions. Yeah, they had 9 mansions. However, to their surprise, they actually didn't find anything. From there, it looked like Meech's decision to play it cool was the right call. After all, the authorities had nothing to work with at that point. However, just a few months later, Doc Marshall, the man who Meech and Terry supposedly did not worry about, decided to snitch on the entire BMF. And while it was just what the feds needed, Doc's testimonies were enough to bring the entire house down. Because of his statements, 36 members of the Black Mafia family were thrown in jail, including their ringleader, Big Meech. Upon hearing about the BMF's operations through Marshall's testimony, the authorities were flabbergasted when they found out how big BMF's operations truly were. Their operation brought in roughly $300 million a year. And Big Meech and Terry, they were sentenced to 30 years in jail. The charges filed against the Flannery brothers were 2 of over 150 indictments relating to BMF. And in doing so, the FBI essentially eradicated the BMF's entire network. Not only that, it was also revealed that the BMF was moving hundreds of kilograms of sugar into Atlanta, Detroit, and other distribution hubs every month. Once the FBI finally cracked down on the entire operation, they seized $21 million in assets, including cash, jewelry, 3 dozen vehicles, and 13 homes in Georgia, Detroit, and LA. But although BMF's drug trafficking spree was finally put to an end in 2005, their mark on hip-hop and pop culture will probably never fade away. Anyways, luckily for Meech, he had good lawyers who were able to reduce his prison time, and on October of 2024, Big Meech finally got to come home. The next rapper on this list is Big Lurch, who didn't grow up in a violent neighborhood. In fact, he had a really nice childhood, immersing himself in poetry, writing, and music. He moved to the Bay Area in the 90s to try and make it as a rapper, however, it never panned out for him. You see, Big Lurch had a tragic life. Despite receiving some success and recognition for his role in pushing the rap subgenre called horrorcore, nothing really went his way. And even when the millennia came in, Big Lurch just couldn't receive a break. It started off badly when his grandmother passed away. And if you thought that it couldn't get any worse for Big Lurch, it did. Because the day after his birthday, a drunk driver rear-ended his car while he was driving home. This accident changed the trajectory of Big Lurch's life for the worse. For one, the accident left Lurch in a coma for quite a while, and when he finally woke up, things got even worse for Lurch as he discovered that the accident left him with a broken neck. And the sad fact was that the pain from his broken neck was too excruciating for him to bear. Due to the injuries he sustained, Big Lurch had a hard time walking and experienced constant chronic pain.
So on September the 16th, I had a car accident. A drunk driver hit my car, I broke my neck. When I got out, I couldn't walk or nothing. I was really feeling a lot of pain.
So what did Big Lurch do? While he was getting heavily medicated in the hospital, he realized that drugs helped him cope with the pain.
What I did was, I started smoking PCP. I smoked it 2 or 3 times when I was younger and got that numbing feeling. So I was using PCP as an anesthesia.
Sadly, due to his horrible injuries, Big Lurch picked up the bad habit of smoking PCP. But it wasn't like he smoked because he wanted to. Rather, his addiction was due to his necessity to quell and numb his pain. But it got even worse for Lurch because he was in a bad slump. He was injured with a broken neck, he was in excruciating pain 24/7, and wasn't getting any success from his rap career. With that, Big Lurch had to find a way to make a living. And since he was already doing PCP, he thought he might as well make a profit from it. And so, Lurch got into the substance industry within LA while getting involved in gangs that frequently used PCP. Now, keep this in mind, because unfortunately for Lurch, his reliance on PCP for relief and income would spell his eventual downfall. While Lurch probably didn't expect that the drug side effects would end up ruining his life, it eventually would, in the worst way possible. Because one night in April of 2002, under the influence of PCP, Big Lurch transformed into a monster in every sense of the word. But before the horrifying and tragic incident unfolded, everything was normal. While staying in Los Angeles, he shared and rented an apartment with his roommate, Thomas, and Thomas's girlfriend, Tynesha Yisei. That night, Lurch and Thomas had a bit of a party. A couple of bottles in, Big Lurch's little get-together with his friends turned into a party, and as you can guess, PCP was involved. So everyone at the party, including Big Lurch, began using PCP by dipping cigarettes into the substance before smoking it. Keep in mind that during this time, Thomas and Big Lurch were both high out of their minds, but the party actually went smoothly, in a sense. Nothing weird happened, everyone got high and drunk and went home. As for Thomas, the morning after the party, he went out of the apartment to handle his business. However, what Thomas probably didn't know was that Big Lurch was in a rabid state due to the dangerous mix of PCP and alcohol. Unfortunately, while Thomas was out and Big Lurch was left in the apartment, someone else was also in the apartment, Tynesha. Sadly for her, when she went into the apartment, she encountered an out-of-control Singleton still high from the evening before, and that was the last that anyone has ever seen Tynesha alive. According to forensic evidence, once Tynesha saw a 6'6" towering man who was drugged out of his mind and was probably in another dimension mentally, she of course tried to barricade herself in her apartment, but her actions were futile. Big Lurch forced his way into her room, and the PCP finally took over. After that, things would get extremely, I can't even say. But just know, he ate her. Anyways, it took him 2 weeks to snap out of his PCP days, and when he finally came through, he woke up in a jail cell with a murder charge on him. But what's crazier is that this is all he could remember on that fateful day.
I mean, all I can remember, the world was gonna end, and I had to find the devil and kill the devil before the world ended. That's the last thought.
Although Big Lurch wasn't aware, nor does he remember eating parts of Tynesha, the medical examinations were enough to prove it. Due to the controversy and interest Big Lurch's life story received, his record label exploited the entire situation and released Lurch's first and only album around that time, which didn't help his case in the slightest. You see, in an attempt to make money off Lurch's situation, the label photoshopped Big Lurch's album cover and placed a skull on a platter without his consent. But there's more. They also released a documentary called Drugs Made Me Do It, which is pretty self-explanatory, right? And this release only elevated Big Lurch's notoriety. Not only was the album cover in poor taste, it was also a blatant attempt by the record label to capitalize off of Tynesha's murder. And as you can imagine, this didn't bode well for Big Lurch's case, as it only served to dig him down a much deeper hole. But of course, Big Lurch still had to face the justice system for his horrific crimes. So once the court proceedings finally took place, Big Lurch tried to plead not guilty due to insanity. Unfortunately for Lurch, a judge ruled that being under the influence of PCP did not constitute being insane. He was convicted of murder and aggravated mayhem and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But that's not all. Because the lyrics of It's All Bad were used in court, specifically awfully titled I Did It To You track that had Big Lurch rapping, I'm like a vampire, fresh meat, I can't pass it, court argued that this type of crime was something that was on Big's mind even before he was high. So on November 7th of 2003, he was guilty of murder and aggravated mayhem. Next on this list, we have Mystikal, a New Orleans rapper whose talents and hits were completely obscured as soon as his problematic behaviors became public knowledge. See, Mystikal was undeniably talented, a Grammy-nominated rapper who grinded and put out chart-topping hits and albums. In fact, in 2000, Mystikal released Let's Get Ready, which debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 and went certified multi-platinum, an accolade that most of your favorite rappers could only hope of achieving. Unfortunately, Mystikal could not keep it strictly music as his legal battles and crimes slowly overshadowed his rap career. You see, Mystikal had a dark and twisted nature. Behind his successful rap career, he struggled with disturbing urges that would ultimately derail both his career and personal life for the worse. And it all started in 2002, almost a decade into his career. On July 3rd of that year, Mystikal called up his hairstylist because he allegedly wanted his braids done. But little did she know, Mystikal didn't just want a quick braid. Rather, Mystikal had a dark, hidden agenda. You see, there was another side to this. Apparently, Mystikal's hairstylist had been embezzling money out of Mystikal's bank account. And once the rapper finally realized that a total of $80,000 was missing, he wanted payback. And what's worse was that Mystikal didn't just want his money back. Instead, what he ended up doing was much darker. Oblivious to what was about to happen, the hairstylist confirmed the appointment with Mystikal. However, once she arrived at his house, she was confronted by him. At first, she tried to make up excuses, but he didn't have any of it. And this is where things went from tense to outright disturbing. When Mystikal came up to the hairstylist, he offered her two options. The first involved Mystikal calling the cops and telling them about her stealing money from him, but the other option was absolutely horrifying. Allegedly, Mystikal told her that if she had sex with him, he was willing to call it even with her. Out of fear, the hairstylist agreed to do the deed with Mystikal. However, it gets way darker. Because not only did Mystikal blackmail her and force her to do unspeakable things with him, what she didn't expect was that Mystikal would bring some protection with him. However, it wasn't rubber. It was his two bodyguards, Ellis and Carter. And sadly, this woman was forced into a really disgusting situation. And if you think it couldn't get any worse, you'd be mistaken. Because not only did Mystikal force her to do the whole thing, he also videotaped it. And in the tapes, the bodyguards were complicit. After all the disgusting and disturbing things that happened, the hairstylist went straight to the cops and told them everything that happened. This prompted the cops to raid Mystikal's house, and in their search, the disturbing tape was discovered hidden in the safe. I don't know why he recorded himself doing the crime, but I guess he was just disturbed. Fortunately, the hairstylist's pleas for help didn't land on deaf ears. And on July 18th of 2002, 2 weeks after the traumatic and disgusting incident, Mystikal and two of his bodyguards, Carter and Ellis, were all arrested by authorities. However, the rapper was able to pay the $250,000 bond. However, despite that, Mystikal was still projected to face a mandatory life sentence if he was convicted of aggravated and blackmail charges. You see, Mystikal's only way of staying out of prison was if his charges were somehow reduced into sexual battery, and sadly for the victim, Mystikal achieved just that. After reducing a sentence, as unfair as it might sound, Mystikal pleaded guilty and, to the confusion of many, became a free man. But justice would still prevail 2 years later. While he initially received a 6-year sentence for sexual battery charges, there were more factors that the authorities had found to further implicate Mystikal. Over the course of this ordeal, Mystikal was charged with 2 instances of gun and drug possession, which of course only made things worse for his current case. Not only that, to add salt to his wounds, adding to the 6-year sexual battery charge, Mystikal had to register as an offender. Fast forward to 2012, you would think that Mystikal would lay low from doing weird and disgusting things after a 6-year jail time and being on an offenders list. However, Mystikal's problematic and deviant habits never seemed to die down at all. That year, Mystikal was once again arrested for domestic and battery after he had a violent argument with his then partner. But that's not all. Remember those disgusting acts he had committed in 2003? Well, that came back to bite him as he allegedly violated his probation from that, which meant that he had to serve 90 days in jail. But sadly, things would only get worse and worse for Mystikal. You see, after he performed at a show in Louisiana on October 22nd of 2016, he was accused of allegedly essaying someone at a casino. To make it worse, DNA results came back positive and ended up linking him for the crime. Obviously, getting caught red-handed and with the amount of disgusting crimes on this list, Mystikal had no choice but to turn himself in, surrendering to authorities in the US state of Louisiana, where he faced an SA charge. And he was wanted on a warrant that listed a charge of first-degree rape. Not only that, he was also charged with killing the woman as well. And what makes this crazier is that this was his second SA charge in the last 10 years. The court decided to hold Mystikal in jail on a $3 million bond, and 2 years later, Mystikal was able to pay the bond after he took an advance from his record label, and once again, he was a free man. But here's the thing, with all the money and power that he had, resorting to SA and more degeneracy for the second time was a horrible decision. You'd think he'd lie low after being branded as an offender. However, as if it couldn't get any more deprived, Mystikal's story takes a much darker route from here. Because on July 31st of 2022, 5 years after getting his second SA charge, Mystikal struck again. And this time, the victim was his ex-girlfriend, who was also his baby mom. But this incident was also a bit more complicated. The thing is that because Mystikal already had a restraining order against his baby mama for some reason. And when she showed up to Mystikal's house unannounced asking for money, what she had assumed would just be a simple conversation about child support soon became one of the worst moments in her life. Their conversation about money quickly turned violent when the woman kept asking Mystikal to provide some sustenance for their adult son. This obviously ticked off the rapper. So what did Mystikal do? Well, surprisingly, Mystikal went to the bathroom to take a breather. While his baby mama assumed the tension would die down, she was wrong, because things got really serious really fast. As soon as Mystikal returned from the bathroom, the woman insisted Mystikal started becoming a completely different person.
They were initially talking. At some point, he stepped away, maybe to the restroom. He came back a completely different person.
Unfortunately for her, their conversation discussing finances was long over, as Mystikal's violent and disturbing nature had already manifested. And sadly, the woman became another victim of Mystikal's disgusting and gut-churning habits. You see, after sleeping out of the bathroom, Mystikal confronted his baby mom. And this wasn't just any type of argument. No, sadly for the baby mom, Mystikal violated her in every sense imaginable. It was so bad that there were marks everywhere, and that's all I can really say. But this is Mystikal we're talking about. If you've been following this segment, then you can already anticipate just how horrible things were about to get. Because after all that violence on his baby mom, Mystikal still wasn't done. He then hid her phone and keys to stop her from leaving the premises, and as she tried to escape, he went ahead and her. Unfortunately for the poor woman, the worst was yet to come, as afterward, Mystikal also essayed her on the spot. Finally, after 3 strikes, the court eventually realized how much of a danger to society Mystikal truly was. It's a good thing that he was arrested on the same day. A couple of weeks later, Mystikal was indicted on 10 counts of domestic battery and false imprisonment. Investigators who searched his home found evidence to corroborate the victim's account of the grape, along with a variety of illegal substances. Right now, he still hasn't been sentenced yet, but it's not looking good for him, since Mystikal wasn't going to be able to pay his way out of this one. And here's a news report about his arrest.
Tonight, Mystikal, whose real name is Michael Tyler, is being held without bond at the Ascension Parish Jail.
Of course, the judge wasted no time in denying him bail, and after they realized that Mystikal was an offender, this happened.
It took the judge about 30 minutes to come to that decision of not having a bond for Mystikal and keeping him in jail because of his lengthy criminal history.
Not only that, the good news is also that if he gets convicted of first-degree rape, there's a good chance he'll serve life in prison. I don't know about you, but having 3 R-word cases in the span of 20 years is just wild. A fan said this about his current situation. I'm like Mystikal, but if you keep getting in the same trouble, it's not a coincidence. Money in game isn't enough for some people. And today, Mystikal is more notorious for his grape charges than his accolades as a rapper. And he has no one to blame but himself for this. Next, let's move on to Cyleno, a rapper famous for his hit single Nene, which dominated both social media and real life in 2015, managing to chart at number 3 on the Billboard charts for 6 weeks, with everyone dancing along to his song. Following the song's success, Cyleno's fame skyrocketed. He scored TV deals, performed in sold-out shows worldwide, and built a solid fan base for himself. However, what seemed like a dream come true at first quickly changed the young rapper's life for the worse. You see, Cyleno's first run-in with the law happened in 2017, 2 years after his hit song was released. At that point in his career, he was on top of the world. However, he somehow found himself in a legal dispute in the UAE. But what exactly happened in the UAE? Well, allegedly, Cyleno failed to perform in 2 separate shows that he was booked for. And because of that, the promoter wanted Cyleno to pay $80,000 for all the expenses, including his performance fee, traveling expenses, marketing, and many more. Unfortunately for him, the court ended up siding with the promoter, and in the end, he needed to pay the full amount. However, Cyleno refused to pay the fee, and because of that, the rapper was placed on a travel ban and forced to surrender his passport to the court until the case was settled. Although Cyleno's representative argued that the promoter was the one at fault and that Cyleno was innocent, what was shocking to some people was that it seemed like it wasn't that Cyleno didn't want to pay up, but rather Cyleno couldn't afford to pay up, which also became a hot topic since, as we mentioned, Nene was so big that the song was being played virtually everywhere, from clubs to sporting events to even TikTok, which meant that Cyleno probably earned millions from it. However, that didn't seem to be the case, because to help him get out of trouble, Cyleno posted a GoFundMe link on Twitter and wrote, "I'm raising money for Free Cyleno. Click to donate." The Bring Me Back to America part is particularly funny, but somehow, the fundraiser was a success, as Cyleno was in fact brought home to America. And all seemed well after that. That was until 2020, when everything slowly started to change for Cyleno. In 2020, 3 years after he was held captive in the Middle East, Cyleno was placed in an embarrassing situation. You see, his girlfriend allegedly uploaded some extremely revealing photos, if you catch my drift, of Cyleno on Twitter. And from there, the images quickly spread throughout social media. As you can imagine, Cyleno didn't take it well. It was a huge breach of privacy. Unfortunately, the rapper couldn't contain his anger. However, what he did after the leak was honestly way too much. You see, in a fit of rage, Cyleno walked into a random home in the Valley Village neighborhood, Los Angeles, looking for his girlfriend while holding a hatchet. Reports say that he was looking for his girlfriend in an attempt to get back at her for leaking the images. Fortunately for the individuals living in the home, they were ready to deal with Cyleno if it came to that, since they were armed. However, what some people didn't know was that beforehand, the authorities were already alerted by someone else about Cyleno's dangerous behavior, because a day before he lashed out carrying a hatchet at the wrong home, he was arrested in Santa Ana and taken to the Orange County Sheriff's Department following a report of a domestic disturbance. So it's hard to imagine if Cyleno still would have crashed out over the leaks, even if they held him there for a couple of days or more, since he was released from custody on a charge of inflicting corporal injury on a spouse or cohabitant. Once the authorities were alerted that Sileno was brandishing a hatchet on an innocent family, they were quickly dispatched to the location. But somehow, Sileno found out that the authorities were already on their way to arrest him. And rationally, instead of waiting for the police to arrive and arrest him, Sileno did what most criminals would do. He and his friends sped off in a futile effort at dodging the law. Unfortunately for them, the LAPD officers cornered Sileno into a roadblock and finally caught him. Looks like he couldn't nay himself out of that one and was charged with 2 counts of assault and a deadly weapon. Sileno quickly posted bail and was released. Anyway, while Sileno awaited trial, you'd think that he would be on his best behavior, right? Sadly, no. 2 months after his hatchet-wielding incident, things would only get worse for Sileno. After getting released from jail, Sileno would more or less crash out and slowly destroy his own career and public image. And his slow demise would continue in October of 2020 when breaking news reported that Sileno had apparently been arrested yet again.
Rapper Silento was arrested this weekend for going 143 miles per hour on I-85. Police pulled over the rapper, whose real name is Ricky Lamar Hawk, on 85 South just before the Claremont Road exit on Friday.
After Sileno was caught, he was charged with reckless driving, speeding, failure to maintain lane, and improper stopping. However, this is where things get embarrassing, because seemingly the success of Nene really got into Sileno's head. See, when Sileno was questioned by the authorities why he was speeding, he had this to say. When asked why he was breaking the law, Sileno justified his actions by claiming he was above the law.
Trying to figure out why you're doing 143. Because I get followed everywhere I go in.
But in the eyes of the law, it didn't matter, since they already had him in cuffs in a jail cell. And while for many people, that encounter should have been the end of his legal battles, that's not how Sileno rolled. Because after he posted bond again, Sileno managed to do something that would put the nail in the coffin that was his one-hit wonder career. You see, on January 21st of 2021, authorities were dispatched to an area in DeKalb County, Georgia, after bystanders claimed that they heard gunshots. Sadly, this wasn't a case of a random shootout where people just missed their targets, because once the cops arrived to where the shots came from, they unfortunately came too late. After arriving at the scene, the police saw a man named Frederick Roots. Although they tried to administer first aid, it was too late, as Frederick immediately succumbed to his injuries. So the detectives got to work to answer the obvious question: who shot Frederick? And well, once they started to compile security videos, CCTV footage, and other video evidence, the police saw vehicles erratically driving away from the crime scene. From there, they finally found a lead as they were hot on the trail. That's when they realized everything pointed to one major suspect, Ricky Hawk, otherwise known as Sileno. And on February 1st of 2021, the police made their move and successfully apprehended Sileno, which they actually even announced on Twitter. Today, Ricky Hawk, 23, was arrested for the... And here's what happened next. Sileno was thrown in jail.
Known for his hit song Watch Me Whip, was arrested for murder.
However, there's a plot twist to the story, because he didn't just get rid of someone random that he had an argument with. The person Sileno ended was someone close to him.
The artist's real name is Ricky Hawk, and he is charged with murder of his cousin Frederick Rooks more than a week ago.
Yes, you heard that right. Frederick was actually Sileno's cousin. And to make this whole situation even more bizarre, during the case, in order to evade prison time, Sileno went the sympathy route. A big part of Sileno's defense was his good deeds as an artist. His lawyers brought up Sileno's charity work and other decent things that the rapper has done for his community. This included showing a video of him telling children to take their exams seriously, as well as an anti-vaping campaign. However, anyone in their right mind would never buy into this. And obviously, the judge did not believe Sileno's good deeds would be enough to outweigh the fact that his cousin in cold blood.
An Atlanta rapper who rose to fame with a one-hit wonder is now charged with murdering his cousin.
Even the reporter could not help but call Sileno a one-hit wonder.
DeKalb County police arrested Ricky Hawk today. You might know him by his stage name Silento. He's accused of shooting his cousin to death last month.
This case was a huge deal at the time, even to people who weren't fond of Sileno's music. Fans wrote, "The last rapper I would have imagined that was gonna catch a body is Sileno, and who thought the kid that was whipping and nay-naying would..." Someone. That's crazy, bro. The sad thing is, the motive for Sileno getting rid of his cousin was never revealed, so we're left wondering what made him commit such a heinous crime. But according to some close to Sileno, there were already signs. You see, his publicist claimed that Sileno had battled issues regarding his mental health for a long time, and a part of that truth was that Sileno's career only ever really started and ended with his Watch Me Whip song, which of course helped him top the charts and reach a level of success that most could only dream of. But this wasn't enough to hide the fact that according to those close to Sileno, he really had a hard time dealing with his mental health down the line. Sileno openly expressed his struggles and even took a break from music to focus on himself. However, his mental health still can't be used as an excuse for getting rid of his cousin in cold blood. Anyways guys, thanks for watching, have a nice day, and see you next time, bye.